All right, let's go ahead and get started and start our Planning Commission meeting with a call to order and a roll call.
Commissioner Commissioner Hall.
Here.
Chair Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Caroline.
Here.
Commissioner Ketchum.
Here.
And Vice Chair Lamont.
All right, let's have approval of the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda? No amendments?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? All right, at this point, oh, sorry, we have video. All right, so at this point, we will take public comments on non-agenda items. Is there anyone here from the public who would like to speak on an item that is not on our agenda for tonight? Okay. Then we will move on to a resolution of appreciation for Peter Lax, who's here in our audience today, who has served quite a few terms and years on the Planning Commission. And we would like to appreciate the time that he spent serving our community through the Planning Commission. Would staff?
Oh, are they gonna
Great. So I would like to read to you. I can come around. Stand up. Please come up so everyone.
It's on.
Great. So everyone can appreciate what you have done for this town. And a proclamation of the Fairfax Planning Commission of the Town of Fairfax, commending Peter Lax for his service and contributions to the Town of Fairfax. Whereas, do you want to turn around so everyone can see you? I believe you're the first commissioner to get one of these on camera. Whereas Commissioner Peter Lax has served the citizens of Fairfax as a member of the Fairfax Planning Commission from March 1st, 2005 through February 4th, 2009, when he was reappointed by the council to serve a second term through February 28th, 2013. And whereas Peter Lax worked tirelessly and in the best interest of the community and its residents as the chair of the Planning Commission in 2009, and whereas Peter Lax has reviewed and acted on planning issues that run the gamut from straightforward fence height variances and encroachment permits to matters with weighty social implications such as medicinal marijuana dispensaries, I remember that one. And whereas Peter Lax has worked on updating the Fairfax General Plan since 2005 and was a driving force in completing the draft in 2010, and whereas Peter Lax became one of the first planning commissioners to use his life experiences and all-around good taste to act on design review applications, when the duties of the commission and the design review board were combined in February of 2012, and whereas Peter Lax has stood unbendingly for the principles of good government, environmental protection, and the preservation of Fairfax's small town character, and whereas Peter Lax has stepped down from his position as a Fairfax Planning Commissioner as of February 28th, 2013, to focus on his legal practice and furthering his musical career, which I have to add, he's heading out right now to go warm up for a gig tonight, so if anyone wants to see him tonight, he'll be at Broadway 19 Broadway. And whereas Peter Lax leaves his position as a planning commissioner with the heartfelt thanks of his fellow commissioners and the citizens of Fairfax, now therefore be it resolved that the town of Fairfax thanks Peter Lax for his dedicated service to the town and declares that the town of Fairfax owes him a great debt of gratitude because of the many years he gave freely of his time to make Fairfax a better place. The foregoing resolution was unanimously adopted in a moment, maybe, I don't want to be presumptuous, but by the Fairfax Planning Commission on the 16th day of May 2013. So I will now entertain a motion.
I'd move to approve the proclamation.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Didn't think so. So here you go. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
If I may, yes, thank you so much. This is it's a great honor, and it's very nice to be appreciated, and also reminded of all the things that we did in the last 8 years. And time does fly. I like to joke that people ask me what's it like being on the planning commission. I sort of joke, well, it's like jury duty for houses. And that is, it's a very important thing that we do. It's probably one of the most important things for the homeowners, really, as far as an interaction with the town. If you've got something that you need done to your house, it's one of the most important things that the town does. And I've really grown to appreciate that. And also, we do a lot of other things too. I've really learned to appreciate the sort of deliberative process, legislative process that we do. I really appreciate staff, Joanne, for being so faithful with the minutes and reducing our inscrutable diatribes into cogent sounding prose for the record. And Linda, for just your incessant efforts on behalf of everyone, for the applicants. I really appreciate how well and how hard you work to accommodate applicants and how diplomatic you are. And I know you get a lot of flack born out of frustration, understandably, from homeowners, and a lot of weighty issues. And I appreciate your good guidance and your guidance to the commission. And Jim, likewise, I appreciate your guidance and excellent suggestions and procedures and moving the process along. And your bigger vision, too, for how to accomplish things and maintain the character of Fairfax. And it's been great working with everyone. And my fellow commissioners, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, Roxanne, but my comments I hopefully will apply prospectively for you. I've really enjoyed all our deliberations and what everyone brings to the council. Everyone brings different experiences, different perspectives, and I've really appreciated hearing everyone's perspectives. And we have a lot of disagreements, which we should. That's part of the process. But I do appreciate that when we have disagreements, that the level of respect for everyone, by everyone in the process. I've really enjoyed that, especially in recent years. And when I first came on, one or two of the commissioners were not quite so respectful. And so I really appreciate the goodwill that everyone brings to the commission. And it's been a great pleasure. And thank you so much.
We look forward to seeing you possibly on the other side every now and again. When you'd like to share your insights and experience with us, please come on back and do so. And we'll give you 3 minutes. Thank you. All right, moving on to consent items. 156 Cascade Drive. So unless there's anyone in the audience or any reason that someone has about pulling this off?
Well, it'd be anybody that wants
Anyone?
in against an
Yeah.
opposition to it.
If there's any opposition to it or issues. Otherwise, we can go ahead and I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent items.
I'd make a motion to approve consent.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. Okay, let's start with item number 2, 17 Woodland Road, application 13-1, and we will start with the staff report.
Okay, this item was continued from the April 4th, 2013 meeting where the commission requested additional information from staff and the applicant. We realized in the course of the meeting that they had not, they didn't want to provide covered parking, but the commission wasn't sure whether they were going to be able to make findings to eliminate it, so the commission wanted to have a design for covered parking so that they could go forward in some fashion. The commission also asked staff to check with the fire department and to have them assess the potential increase in fire hazards if the structure was included in the project. Since that meeting, the applicants have decided that they do want a covered spot, so they're no longer requesting a parking variance to have only uncovered parking. But you still need to review the architecture of it, and staff feels that the architecture meets the criteria, the design review criteria set forth in the code. So our original recommendation to approve the project with the modification of the additional covered parking space stands based on the original findings and the original conditions of approval. So that would conclude our report, and the applicant is here if you have any questions.
All right, are there any questions for staff?
So just so we're clear, I looked at the new plans and things, so that becomes part of the record, but there's not a new staff report, or did you do a new?
I didn't do a new
You just
staff report.
attached this and the letter from the fire department as
Right.
additions to the record, basically? Okay.
So what we're approving tonight is just the addition, or are there other questions about the fire department?
You're
things?
actually just approving the design review of the carport, because they're no longer requesting the parking variance, and you approved the use permit at the last meeting. So,
Great, thanks. Any further questions for staff before we bring up the applicant? Okay, let's go ahead and bring up the applicant, and if there's anything that you'd like to tell us about the design of this carport.
I really have nothing further to add. If you have any questions, I'll answer them, but I think the drawings are self-explanatory. The owner selected a prefabricated carport, which, when I heard he wanted to go prefab, I was somewhat concerned, but I do like this design a lot, and I've looked at photographs of it on the web, and it seems to be a very nice design, so I'm pleased with that.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
I was just curious, there's a Lexan roof on the thing, is that correct?
It's a clear polycarbonate.
But you don't, I mean, this is not a design review issue, is that just for my own edification? Is that do you need a Class A roof, or rated roof for that structure, or is that going to be an issue?
Yes, you do need a Class A roof. And I haven't checked with the fire department to see whether this is acceptable or not.
Okay, thank you.
Does staff have any feedback
we were
on
just
that?
commenting that it does go again, to, it gets routed to the fire department again when the construction plans are put together. So they'll have another look at it, and if they do need some material changed, they'll require it at that point. Right.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much. We will now hear public comment, if there's anyone in the audience that has any public comment. No, seeing none, then I'll bring it back to the commissioners for discussion and action.
So one of the reasons why I had concerns around the requirement to have a covered parking without a design. I think in some cases, and I'm glad to hear the applicant's willing to move forward with kind of putting it in the card deck. We don't have to sort of debate the code that the town has. They also raised concerns over the visibility and how it might affect the view, and it looks like based on having the design, it won't affect it, and I think it's a tasteful approach to doing it. So I'm very comfortable with what they've come forward with. So.
Any other commissioner comments? Paul?
Yeah, I like the carport. I like it'll help break up the view of the skirt of the deck from the road, so I think it's a good solution.
Can I actually just add one thing, which I think if we do have these kind of situations in the future where the applicant doesn't want to have a car deck and it's required by code. I do think for it to come to us, we would need to see a design, even if it's
I
not part
agree.
of their application, because I think through the streamlining, we were able to work it out.
Yeah,
but-
we'll
but-
indicate to the applicants that it's to their benefit to provide some kind of drawings, because that's where we got.
Because it creates a delay.
Yeah,
I think
if
it's an automatic
they could
delay.
refuse, they could say, well, I don't want to, but I'll just advise them that it could
Right.
result in delays if they don't have one.
Yeah, because I think for us to try to move forward with
I agree.
approving something that we don't see is also problematic.
I agree.
so, Okay.
Do
That was
you,
bad planning on my part.
well, I was going to say, do you feel, is it difficult for you to deny completion if they don't? I mean, one of the options would be to
Well, they
say
have,
it can't
they
be
have,
deemed complete until.
they have the legal right to request a variance, and they're, everyone's always on a budget and a shoestring, and so to require additional drawings, in the future, I will push more strongly. I'll say, this is what another applicant ran into when they were trying to request a covered parking variance, and I'll say, it would behoove you to come up with something. But if they refuse, I mean, I would still have to process it, because they're not proposing to build a carport, right? Yeah, but I'll be more assertive next time. I didn't quite think it through on this one, so next time I will.
Any other commissioner comments before?
No, I concur with Morgan, Brennan, that it's a good solution. I'm glad you were able to find something that worked with the site and work with the design of the house.
Same comments. I think in this case, it was a very nice minimalist design that really brings in the landscape and the design of the house. So I think it's adding to the overall project.
Just one minor thing. It seems to me that if that carport is sitting in front of the whole project before it even begins, it's really going to be right in the way of all the construction. Is there a way they could post a bond of some kind, a performance bond that guarantees
that.
that it would get built? Because it's just going to add cost.
Yeah,
to
we've
walk
had
around this
people either put up bonds or submit a deposit or have a certificate of deposit for the cost of constructing
Okay.
the carport. So if you wanted to include that in that condition, say they can either build it or post some kind of a monetary or bond to ensure that it gets constructed, that's fine.
Could you identify which condition that would go under? Condition 1 of planning conditions on page 5. A covered parking space must be, condition 2 must be completed during the first phase of construction. So condition number 2 would be amended to say the covered space must be completed during the first phase of construction or a bond of,
To cover the cost of construction,
or a bond to cover the
be
cost of
posted
construction.
prior
be
to
posted
issuance of the
prior-
building permit.
That. Okay. Okay. Do we need a formal motion to make an amendment to this before motion of action? Go ahead and make a motion complete.
I'd make a motion to approve application 13-01 as amended with the proposed carport cover, and that condition 2 of the conditions of approval be amended to state that the covered parking space must be completed during the first phase of construction, or a bond to cover the cost of construction shall be posted prior to issuance of the building permit.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so, application 1301 for 17 Woodland Road has been approved with the conditions per the staff report, and there's a 10-day appeal period with a $500 fee. So thank you very much. All right, let's move on to item number 3, 696 Cascade Drive, application 13-3. If we could have the staff report on this application?
Okay, the applicants are applying for a use permit, an encroachment permit, and a variance to legalize an existing second unit. The application requires a variance to the size of the second unit because the proposed unit, it is a one-bedroom unit and complies with the code in that fashion, but it's 558 square feet in size, and so it exceeds the limit that it can only be 30% of the size of the main unit. It also requires an encroachment permit because the existing driveway that accesses the two-car garage at the rear of the site it goes into one of these little 10-foot wide pathways. It's been that way since the house was constructed, so nothing's changing with that regard. The site exceeds the parking requirement for a single-family home and a second unit. They have 3 covered spots, and they have additional parking in the driveway. And the main things that staff looks at when we're reviewing these second units is we make sure that the second unit doesn't change the single-family character of the house. In this case, you won't even know that there's a second unit in there. No changes are being made to the outside of the house. And we also look at parking, because that usually is what impacts the neighborhood if cars are spilling over into the street. This is a one-bedroom unit, and it's not expected that they would generate the need for a lot of extra parking. So we're recommending approval of the second unit based on the findings and subject to the conditions contained in the staff report. And I think the planning director also wants to.
Right, I would just like to add that the new general plan that was adopted last year in April encourages second units, the creation of second units. It's part of our housing element strategy. There is a history of a lot of, shall we say, informal second units in town. We will be redrafting the second unit amnesty ordinance in the near future to try and help people that are interested in bringing their informal second units into compliance, which is a good thing for everybody, so we can know where the second units are in cases of emergency. We get a little bit of tax relief, and they also don't have any trouble with renting and going into disputes with renters. And if they chose to sell the property, they would not have a non-conforming second unit on the site. We also, as part of the new general plan, actually stipulate that if a new house is built over 2,000 square feet, that they either provide a second unit on site or they pay $10,000 into a housing trust fund to go towards affordable housing projects. We're in the process right now of revisiting the housing element that was adopted by the town in April of last year to further seek the Housing and Community Development Department's certification of our housing element. And we are desperately looking for second units to bring into compliance, both now as we go through this process to get certification and after as we move forward with implementing the housing element. So this project is very in keeping with the direction of the town via the adoption of the general plan. I might just revisit for a moment what Linda explained in her staff report, that the stipulation in the code is that either a maximum square footage of 700 square feet or 30% of the main unit size. In this case, if you took just the 30%, you'd only have a 214 square foot unit. So that's where the twist comes in. The code actually reads whichever is the more stringent. In this case, you can't have the more stringent because it's below the required minimum size. The good news is, if you understood what I just said, the unit size is below the minimum, below the maximum and above the minimum. So it fits in that sense. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions for staff on this application? Okay.
Is there anything in the town code or in the general plan that, I believe the town code says that the second units are hopefully used for elderly or disabled or low-income people. Is there anything in the general plan stipulating that if this second unit is approved and rented out, that it can't be rented at market rate?
No, there's no income caps in the general plan or the existing code, to my knowledge. The philosophy, however, in limiting the square footage on second units is to keep them affordable by definition, in the sense that they are smaller units per se. There might be latitude as we draft revisions to the town code to address that issue. But at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, nothing in the existing code addresses that. And I can't pull off the top of my head every aspect of the housing element right now. We have a lot of recommended programs and approaches. But again, one of the beauties of this particular size unit is that by definition, again, it's small enough to where on a square footage basis to be competitive with other units in town, it would be by definition a lower priced unit within our affordability ranges via HUD also.
Go ahead.
Is there anything in the general plan or the town codes specifying the proximity of these second units to public transportation?
No, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because when we rewrite the next second unit amnesty ordinance, there are two issues that have been slowing down the formalization of informal second units as far as we can tell. Those would be the cost of putting in sprinkler systems and also the provision of providing one more on-site parking space. So if you recall, when we adopted the last fire code in January of 11, the council actually chose to relax the sprinkler requirement on new second units in the central part of town in what's considered the non-wildlife urban interface, abbreviated WUI zone, and we extended that very narrow strip, sort of the flat area in the middle of town, if you will. We extended it up to a 30% slope, the reasoning being that fire apparatus can get to that location more easily. So I believe that we will be recommending that provision in the second unit amnesty ordinance, and we're probably going to take a step in the direction of relaxing the parking requirement for a certain area in proximity to transit stops.
I had a quick follow-up question then. Would this unit count towards our required ABAG numbers, or do we only get units to count if there's some sort of formal affordability cap on them, or would this actually count?
This counts.
One other thing to note when we do look at revising it, 30% of 2,000 square feet is 600 feet. So there's a bit of a contradiction, which would mean that we would constantly be having applications come before us for variance on this particular stipulation. So we might want to align those in the future.
Good catch. Thank you.
I actually had a follow-up when we look at the size variance going in place, and it was noted on page 6.6 that there are other exceptions to the size unit, 17 Vista Way, 35 Forest Terrace, 130 Mono. Do you know, were those originally informal units that were then brought in through the formalization process, or were these ones that were just originally granted a variance?
12 Vista was new, 130 Mono was an informal one that was legalized, and what was the last address?
35 Forest Terrace.
35 Forest Terrace was an informal one that was legalized.
Thanks.
Any other questions before we bring the applicant up? Okay, let's go ahead and bring the applicant up. Or did you have one? Okay, one more. Go ahead.
So I'm looking at all of the conditions and the requirements, like metering requirements. Do those get checked at the building or at the kind of the building code inspection stage?
Yes, and then it's complaint-based, so I mean,
Okay.
if they decided to not have it be owner-occupied, we wouldn't know about it unless someone complained.
But in terms of all the metering,
Yes, that all gets
These
checked
are-
at the building
okay.
permit.
great, thanks.
Okay, welcome. Tell us about your project.
Thanks for having us. I'm Brian Jones, owner of, with my wife Terry, of 696. And I have a correction here and just a reinforcement. And I can either read them which would take less time than me just talking, rambling on, or I could submit them as a written statement, whichever is better for you guys.
Probably if you could just summarize them and definitely submit the written to the staff so that they can read them over, but we'd like
Alright.
to hear whatever your comments are. This is your time to tell us about the project or anything you'd like to tell us, so.
Okay, all right, I can do that, we can do that. I wrote this up so that it would save time, basically. I wouldn't normally. Thank you for your consideration in our application. There are two brief points we would like to make. We would like to be sure that the record is correct about the history of our property and the dwelling on it. The original structure consisted of 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, living room with fireplace, and a kitchen. We understood verbally from the previous owner, and there is physical evidence, by the way, that the west portion of the structure was added well after the original structure was moved to the site after World War II.
Was portable housing from Mare Island, which is all over Marin County.
The addition apparently consisted of an additional bedroom, bath, and large living room with additional front door and fireplace, entirely separate and distinct except for the pocket door allowing access to the kitchen from the west section. We believe that the 2-car garage above was added either at the same time as that addition or later. We are under the impression that Ms. Valens, the previous owner, had a platonic relationship with a gentleman friend who stayed in the west unit from time to time. Thus, to us, the west portion of the structure was always a second unit. It merely lacked a kitchenette. The second point is that we would also like to reinforce that the driveway, alley, path, whatever you want to call it, of concern for the commission was understood by us at the time we were considering buying the house to be shared land since before we purchased the property. There was a water storage tank, for example, in or near the alley driveway that we understood to be shared, and we were told that the county personnel needed access to that tank to obtain emergency or water for whatever reason. We thought that was great to have around, just in case, right? We have no need for sole access to the 2-car garage and or ownership of that property. We also understand now that our use is and will be an encroachment. We didn't know that before the survey. And if it's allowed in the future and must be revocable, we can accept that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes? Okay. Any questions of, don't go away. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much. Any questions of the applicants? No? I don't have any either. It seems a fairly straightforward application. It's, what? Yes, we won't forget the public, but I don't think we've got any questions for you, so thank you very much for coming up here. And if, sure.
Here.
Is that I've followed for quite a long time the second unit amnesty, probably for understandable reasons, and I was really hoping you'd reinstate it. But what I would say is that the people that we have had renting our units are exactly the people that you're trying to encourage. They've been older,
our son.
yeah, including our son. They've been older single women. They've been young people who are working in nonprofits. They're teachers. They're people who really are doing great things in this community, but they can't afford the typical rents. And that was when we bought this house, we care about the property a lot, and we thought if our kids ever have a chance to live in Fairfax, you know, they would have to have a leg up. So, so anyway, your idea is a good one. Thanks.
Thanks for hearing us.
Thank you. All right, now we would like anyone from the public who would like to speak on this application, you're welcome to come up to the podium, and you'll have 3 minutes. Please state your name and your address. And is there anyone who'd like to say anything Okay, before we bring it back to the commission. All right, so we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and action. You'd like to say something?
I would just say lack of questions doesn't mean anything bad. It's a very straightforward, simple project. I think I pointed out some of the, as you pointed out, the requirements of the second unit, not under amnesty, are certainly different than they were when we did have the amnesty program. And I think that is, I'm commending you for coming forward with the application. But I think that was my question for staff, is how we deal with some of the requirements that do exist right now for the second unit program. But I'm very comfortable with it. It's very simple. It's, as you described, as simple as can be with closing in a pocket door. When you read the fire code requirements, it's not simple at all. So as long as you're aware of that and are comfortable moving forward, I'm happy to support this.
Any other commissioner comments?
No, I just, I think this is a good candidate for complying with the second unit, and the parking's already there, so I'm happy that the homeowners have come forward to complete the application.
I guess my only comment, looking where the encroachment is right now on the driveway, public space probably will never get turned, but never say never. I lived in Orange County where public space became housing. But if that encroachment, I mean, if we look at it right now, that part of the driveway would have to go away, you could still access the garage if that just became dirt or gravel. But if that space was somehow physically removed, would that pose a problem accessing the garage in its current, I guess, question for staff, would it pose a problem accessing the garage?
I think they could still get there. And it's doubtful that it would, we contacted all the different agencies, and none of them seem to be concerned enough to indicate that we should deny the request. Right. So, and it's an existing condition. So
but and I can see, I mean, right now it's a driveway, and so it's not, there's no development, but if there were a wall down along the edge of the driveway or something like that, that would kind of preclude the access.
And if they
so the way it's developed right now is, I think, fine, the way it's shown.
Right. We had this situation
more,
come up for a second unit when the new house went in on Vanny Lane. And it's how it is now, but if something happens in the future and they are unable to provide their parking, if they want to keep the unit, they'll be back in front of you asking for relief from the parking requirement. Right. Or providing it somehow. So there's still a way to move forward if some agency decided they needed that
right.
area.
But I guess what I'm getting at is there isn't a necessity to add a condition that wouldn't allow development on that, because that's not.
Yeah, I don't think we have the legal ability to do that.
Right, because it's not their parcel.
Yeah, I think the best we can do is.
If there was development, you'd have to follow up on it when that happened.
And the space that's required for an additional unit is not a covered garage space, it's
No.
just a space, right?
Right.
So that property probably would even still have sufficient, even if access to that two-car garage, no, because there's only one, but anyhow.
Yeah, the ones in the driveway would be tandem, so I think they'd still probably have the number, but they'd
Not
be in
the
tandem.
property. Right, okay. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that this does seem like a fairly straightforward, the lack of questions was really fairly straightforward.
Yeah, I think you're to be commended to helping out with the housing element in town. I would, though, advise you to investigate the costs that you're going to incur satisfying the fire, water, and septic. It could be a lot more than the $800 estimated. Okay, good.
I have to say that's even more commendable.
Well, oh yes, I was going to say sensing consensus.
Looking on the site plan, I noticed that there is, to the right of the residence, another area where they have parking as well. So they seem to have unusual situation where they have extra parking available.
Well, sensing a general consensus, I'm open for an action.
I make a motion to approve the application.
All right, we have a motion and a second for approval of application 1303. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, your application has been approved. There's a 10-day appeal period with a $500 appeal, and I would encourage you to help us out in the future when we do have any public hearings or when the town council is looking at housing issues on this area of the amnesty when it comes up again, to come back and participate in that conversation. Given your experience as a member of the public, I think it would be very informative to all of us to hear from you again when that issue comes back up. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. No worries, it was approved, and thank you very much for being here. Sorry you had to come all the way for that. Thank you. Okay, moving on to discussion items. We have item number 4, which is a continued discussion and consideration of the draft ordinance for leaf blowers, AKA noise ordinance, and could we have the staff report on that?
Linda's going to get the staff report. She was here for both of the meetings where you discussed it, so she was very helpful in drafting this first cut at it. So we purposely did not prepare a resolution for it tonight, so no matter what happens, we'll be going back to prepare a resolution when you're done with the editing.
Yeah, we did the best we could based on your comments at the 2 meetings, but comments were made by individual commissioners that weren't actually acted on by, or voted on by the entire commission, so we kind of tried to coalesce it into an ordinance, but this is the time when you can make changes and additions and eliminations. We also went through the resolution that the council came up with to make sure that you had actually talked about all the items, and we think you did. Item 1 was, when will the ordinance take effect? And some ordinances, the council will do a delayed effect, like 6 months or so, but in this case, ordinances are adopted and they go into effect 30 days later. That's the way a normal ordinance works, and we don't see any reason to change that, but you can make it longer if you'd like. Item 2 is limiting the days and times of the week that blowers and other power equipment can be operated, and you did weigh in on that, and we tried to change the hours the way we thought the majority of you were heading, but you can change that too. And item 3 was encouraging persons operating leaf blowers or other power equipment to ensure that leaves, dirt, and other debris are not blown onto adjoining private or public properties. And what we thought we heard most of you saying is that you thought that would be better addressed through education, such as maybe having pamphlets available at town hall or attaching something to the business license form for landscape maintenance and contractors. And item 4 was providing for an exception to the ordinance in case of hardship, and that's already in the existing ordinance. There's already a process that allows that. We did make a change to the ordinance. Right now, exceptions are granted by the town manager, and I believe that this is an older ordinance, and it was probably put in place when either they didn't have a planning director or it was a much smaller staff. It's that kind of thing we think would be better for the planning director to entertain the requests and grant the exceptions, and so we've made that change to the ordinance. And number 5 was whether or not to include both leaf blowers and other power equipment in the regulations, and we thought after listening to you that the majority of you agreed that you didn't want to single out leaf blowers and treat them differently because they are the same decibel levels as other power equipment. Item 6 was inclusion of an exemption during states of declared emergencies as determined by the town manager, and we did include that in the new ordinance. 7 was whether authorized town employees operating leaf blowers on public property during regular business hours should be exempt from the regulations. And we did not exempt staff members. We feel that the hour changes, they can still perform their job during those permitted hours. So then the last one, number 8, was that the ordinance provide for penalties, and the noise ordinance already includes a section about penalties. So you have the first attempt at a draft in front of you, and you can
Madam Chair, if I might just add, when Linda's saying we made those changes to the ordinance, just for the benefit of the public who's looking at us again tonight via the telecast, we made recommended changes to the draft ordinance. We're all going through an exercise tonight where we're creating a recommended set of changes to the noise ordinance that will then be passed up to the town council. And as usual with ordinances, there will be a first reading, there would be a second reading at a subsequent town council meeting, and then an ordinance goes into effect 30 days after the second reading. So that's the exercise we're involved with tonight and have been on 2 prior Planning Commission meetings. And again, after your deliberations tonight, if you get to the finish lines on content of the language, then we would draft a resolution to bring back for you to move it up to council. I might add that Commissioner Shelby Lamont couldn't make it tonight. She wanted to make sure we had a quorum, so she was on call. She's at a school meeting. You probably know where that is, Shelley, in Deer Park. She did send me an email at 5:27, which I was fortunate enough to be at my desk and retrieve, so I just want to briefly read you something that she chimed in about. I would ask for a brief follow-up on the education section of the dust issue and how that would be achieved. I believe Linda just read to you that her take home from your prior discussion was that rather than regulate the dust issue, you wanted to help inform the public through information about the hazards of kicking up the dust through leaf blowers. She goes on to say, are there any other materials included with the business license package? In other words, there had been some discussion about including this educational material with the business package. I don't know if there is. I don't believe there is. She says, seems like a good place to start, but it might also be a good discussion item. And I just don't want that part to get lost in the completion of the amendment. And that would conclude her remarks. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take questions for staff, and then we'll open it up to the public for comments before bringing it back to the commission. So does anyone have any questions for the staff?
Yeah, in our current town code, what were the hours of operation for construction? I didn't have my code with me, and I don't recall.
Well, Linda's looking that up.
It's 8 to 8.
I think it
8
goes
to
8 to 8. And we did
And
have...
on weekends and holidays, it's 9 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Right, and in our new noise element of the general plan that was passed in April of last year, it's a very good read for those members of the public watching or listening to this later. You can access the new general plan on the town's website, and the noise element is very informative of what a challenge dealing with the increase of background noise in communities such as Fairfax is. In that new noise element, it lists a number of standard approaches to lessening the impacts, and I believe we presented that to you in a prior staff report. Again, that's online, and people can visit that. And I might just remind you that we've had a lot to deal with regards to noise, it seems like, lately. So we will eventually be revisiting the noise element. This is a first stop in doing so. Thank you.
Are there any other clarification questions? I've got a really quick one in terms of your recommendation for action for tonight. Given that we don't have a resolution before us, I'm assuming you outlined there's 3 options for us tonight: either approve the draft ordinance, approve it with changes, or continue the discussion. Even if we approve the ordinance or any changes to it tonight, we still have to continue this item because we don't have a resolution before us. Is that correct? You're nodding your head, so they're nodding their head. Okay.
That's correct.
Is there any provision for non-power tool noise making, like hammering?
clarification on that, it's construction noise that's limited, not the construction. So that was my question too, is what's being limited is the decibels, not the use or the action. And that's what I wanted clarified as well, that we don't say you can't do construction, or you can't do hammering, or you can't have a picnic. It's that you can't be loud. And I just wanted to clarify that's what the language says.
Well, while Linda's looking that up, let me just read in the draft language before you on line 10. The operation of any tools or equipment used in construction or demolition work or in property maintenance work between the hours of 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. Monday through Friday, between the hours of 4 p.m. and 9 a.m. on Saturdays. The operation of any tools or equipment used in construction or demolition work or in property maintenance work on Sundays or holidays is prohibited. So I would read that first line on line 10, the operation of any tools or equipment.
I was confused for two reasons. One, the first thing is there's no verb in it, that first sentence. And I wasn't sure if this was a continuation of a sentence it sounded like it was a piece inside the ordinance that had some other meaning to it rather than just what it was. It was a noun clause, not a whole thought.
Sometimes in the language of ordinances such as this, when you've got a list of items you're adding, it's not exactly a complete sentence exercise. You're welcome to add a verb.
But Shelley actually
It does read it, but it's not
that the heading
constructed right.
This fell under a heading, and the heading actually says construction, demolition, domestic power tools. So if you do want it to pertain to all construction tools, power or not powered, we'll have to change the heading.
And that's something I personally would like to have a discussion on, but the clarification is helpful. So I'd like to hear from the audience and then maybe bring that point back to here for discussion about, are we talking about the noise or the use? And I won't go further on that. Go ahead.
Is there any provision in the ordinance for homeowner use of noise-making tools on their own property? For instance, say on...
You mean an exemption from the time limits?
Yeah.
No. And what I thought I heard, that was one of the things you didn't vote on, which it seemed like there might have been a difference of opinion on. Some people seem to want to exempt homeowners from having time limits, and then other people felt that they shouldn't have limits. So that's something you guys will have to decide as, majority.
Any other questions, or should we hear from the public and then bring it back?
I'd like to hear from the
Great.
public.
Okay, let's hear from the public. If you're here to speak on this item, please come up to the podium, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes to make a statement.
Hi, Cindy Swift, 55 Madrone Road. I had a couple questions for you reading the ordinance as it's written. In the line that starts with line 10 on there, I know you've changed the hours from what was 8 to 8 on the weekdays. You've cut out Sunday, and Saturday's limited to 4 to 9 where it was 8 to 9. So, one of the questions I had goes to, does that mean, all construction is limited by those hours? So even if I've got a remodel and I've got somebody working where now they could work to 8 o'clock, we're saying that they can't work beyond 5. The question of whether a homeowner's doing some work applies there too. You've put in the property maintenance piece of that, so you're covering, what was exempted before, like the gardening equipment. So when I look at that from a homeowner's perspective, we're limiting the homeowner's use to like Saturdays, basically. So if you have a homeowner that's working and can't get home before 5 o'clock, which most of them can't, then they're limited by they can't work on the weekdays and they can't do anything on Sunday. The second section, which is amending para 2, I had questions there on, I guess, the definition of mechanically powered. That's not listed as one of the definitions in the ordinance, and I'm assuming that that means anything that is not humanly powered. So even if it's like a drill that's battery operated, is that mechanically powered on there? And there was a deletion on the noise aspect of it from the original ordinance. So what the last sentence there says is, the operation of any mechanically powered tools on Sundays or holidays is prohibited. So the question that brings to me is, if I'm a homeowner, I do woodwork, I've got a garage, I'm making a bookcase, I want to use an electric sander on that, does that mean I'm prohibited from doing it because that's what the sentence says? If that's the intent, that's restrictive. And those are the only comments I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just speak to one of the questions in the beginning? There are allowances in the existing noise ordinance that prevail independent of these recommended changes that allow for exceptions. We had a discussion in the beginning, I believe, about allowing for special circumstances. In our first staff report, we recommended that you allow and leave that piece in the ordinance to allow for exceptions, and I think the language tonight is asking for that exception to be deemed by the planning director, not the town manager. So do it at the staff level in our department. And also, the rest, most of what else was brought up is for you to weigh.
I'm going to have the rest of the public, if there is any, before we comment. Nope. Do you want to say anything? Come, push the button there and tell us your name and address, and then we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, my name is Marcia Wildvine. I live at 399 Forest Avenue. I think I've missed a lot. This is the first time I heard of this meeting. So unfortunately, I don't know what's already been proposed, but I wanted to come to support the idea that there are more regulation on power tools. I have it's called fibromyalgia, so I'm very sensitive to sounds. And so for many people, it might be an annoyance, and for other people that have physical disabilities, it can actually be rather life-altering to have skill saws or gas-powered lawn, leaf blowers, etc. So I'm curious to find out what is being proposed by reading the ordinance, and I guess that I probably am way late in this whole thing, but I thought I would come just to say that I am pleased that there is movement to protect people's, enjoyment of peace and quiet. Thank you very much. Where do I get the ordinance?
Madam Chair. So, do you have access to the internet?
Yes.
Okay. If you go to thetownoffairfax.org, you'll find the agenda for tonight's meeting and the packet. In that packet is a staff report with any supporting information on all the items that are covered tonight, and you'll find the draft ordinance. And again, tonight, they will be presumably moving towards further refining this language.
Okay.
And then a month from now, on the third Thursday of the month, in this room, the normal Planning Commission meeting, we will bring this item back again with the changes they've made tonight, if any, and we expect some, and there'll be an ordinance, or sorry, a resolution, which is a formal action attached to that, presumably at the next meeting, and they will pass it, and that will then get sent up to the town council that adopts and formally adopts ordinances. Excellent. So there'll be another planning commission meeting at least, and then month. It'll be scheduled for the next available town council meeting, and people will go through the same exercise where the staff will give a report, the town council will ask the staff questions, and then it'll be opened up to the audience, and there'll be, I presume, several comments, both for and against these regulations at the planning commission, sorry, it's the town council level. So yes, you came in a little bit far along because this has been discussed at the town council level on a couple of occasions with a complaint by a gentleman that lived at Bennett House.
I read it about
yeah, it's very sensitive. The good news also is Bennett House has sought to regulate the leaf blowers in some fashion. I'm not 100% sure how, but there's been a little mitigation of that impact to him already there, and now this has continued to move forward. So you come in about halfway through.
Sorry.
Stay tuned.
Thank you.
You're welcome to come and chime in.
since-
And I just want to make sure Marcia knows that your letter did get in their packet, so they
Oh.
have read your letter.
Good, thank you. I guess since I have if a minute to ask one more question, I live next door to 45 Forest Terrace, and they've had construction for about 2 years. I've lost 3 sets of tenants in my duplex because of the noise. I wonder, is there any provision for, I know that they have hour provisions, but continuous construction or continuous noise. Is there anything that's proposed for those kinds of situations? Because 2 years is a long time.
Some towns have adopted ordinances that require that people finish a project within a certain amount of time or they start getting fined. Fairfax doesn't have anything in effect, and I don't believe I've heard that anyone's ever asked the council to consider something like that yet.
But you do have a right to be, you do have a right to a maximum amount of noise that can come on your property. So you should call us and call the building official in town if you have ongoing problems with the noise, and we can look into it further. It's hard to answer your question right now without knowing the particulars on what's going on.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I would just stop by.
Yeah,
Okay.
call the building official or myself, the planning director, Jim
Okay.
Moore or Mark Lockaby.
Thank you. Thank you
welcome.
very much. Good work.
Thank you. Anyone else? Would you? No? Okay. All right, let's bring it back up here for discussion, and if I'd like to, Jim, tear off of that question, because one of the questions I had about the times, in addition to what the prior times were, how do these times track with what we typically approve during construction for projects? Because I know when we have individual projects that come before us, there are stipulations around construction, allowable construction times.
And this is in line with what you've done historically. I don't remember what they did on the Good Earth, but for
I know
single-family
exactly-
home
I
projects.
remember exactly what we did. We allowed them because we wanted to shorten the period of construction overall in terms of days and months. We, during the community agreement that happened in this room, we allowed them to work up to the 8 o'clock that was allowed in the code unless we got 3 independent complaints in 1 week, and then they would have been cut back to 5 o'clock. But we actually used that as an example in your first staff report of certain circumstances, not unlike the creek bank restoration on the other side of Farron's Home that's going to happen this summer, where we have to let the work happen with when this creek is at its lowest. So there's another exception where you have to get this project through.
And so now in the future, those will have to be variant, because currently it went up until 8 o'clock at night, so there was no variance required. So now if we shorten it to 5 o'clock, if we want to let them go to 8 o'clock, will there be a noise variance required in an
It's not a variance.
application?
They can make an application to, if you go with our recommendations for the draft, they would make an application to Jim. He would review, why they're requesting the exception, and then he would make the decision whether to let them to continue working later.
But I think right now, every time we issue a permit, we put a time constraint on it.
Yeah,
And it's actually more restrictive than the noise ordinance.
Right.
So
For single-family home projects, you
as
have-
any application comes in, I would think it would be, if it needs to go later, that would be part of the application package, not an after the fact, we're going to do this. So I
Ideally-
think it would be
ideally.
important that if those were the cases, it needs to be heard, part of their application, whether it's a variance or whether it's, these are the conditions of this project, this use permit essentially, that we'd be issuing.
I could see
So-
exceptions to that, though, if something comes up during construction and they're now up against the wall with finishing, and then they've already gone through entitlements and building permit, and they want to hurry up and finish. So there might be some exceptions.
But I think those are all, they will, but I think it's important that it's heard and brought forward as part of the application.
Okay, so we've got a couple of issues. We got the time allowance.
Can I make
Sure.
a point
Go ahead.
about this? So I think what's important is we have this ordinance, these are modifications to the existing ordinance, but nobody has the existing ordinance to know how it's being modified
We'll bring
and
it
how
next
these
time.
fit into. So everybody understands, section 1 is modifying 2 paragraphs that fall under construction demolition of domestic power tools, whereas I've read section 2 of this as modifying the exemption to all of the noise requirements, and I don't see those as exemptions to the construction demolition. A contractor doing the work, I see those as exemptions to the individual homeowner, for the individual homeowner. That's how I've always been interpreting this, that construction, demolition, section C of 82060, it applies to
Anyone,
commercial.
our code right now doesn't make a
So
distinction
the language is not
between-
distinguishing between it, and so,
Right,
so then we set limits and then we set exceptions for the exact same thing. So that's what I'm trying, I thought it was who is doing it also
that-
mattered.
no, and what we thought we heard is there were some of you that wanted to distinguish between homeowners and
Right.
commercial people, but there were others that said, you know, just because I'm a homeowner, I don't want to be prohibited from having my commercial landscape people coming on the weekend when I can
Right.
oversee what they're doing. So
But-
what I thought you said was you didn't want to start distinguishing in the noise ordinance and treating homeowners and commercial people differently, but you can definitely do that if you want to start changing the restrictions for contractors and landscape maintenance people and making it different from homeowners, you can do that.
Is your question whether or not section 1 is only applying to does it apply to construction or contractors?
That's,
And the code doesn't,
the code
It's
doesn't
just
distinguish,
construction,
although
period.
the last 2 meetings, that was my thought process. I will also, what's interesting is that, I guess the way it's built is section C1 basically says when you cannot do these things, and section 2070D says when you can do those things. So they'll need to be adjusted equitably.
One of them says you can't do it between the hours of 5 p.m.
Overnight.
one night to
Yeah.
it basically, and then also at 5 p.m. on Monday to 8 a.m. on Tuesday, and the other one says you can do it from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. so one says you can do it during the day, and the other one says you can't do it during the night, and it would be nice to have them both say the same thing.
Yeah.
Same length.
But I do
Well,
think
and-
it,
yeah, we were just trying to change, that's how the
Yeah.
existing ordinance works, but if you think a different way works.
well, I think what's important is that at least the town code as it stands doesn't distinguish whether you're a homeowner, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a business operating under a business license. And to me, that if I'm a homeowner, there might be other things that I'd want to be able to do, but so I'm going to be thinking about it that way as opposed to I'm hiring somebody and bringing them in for this period of time, which I think is a very different kind of a use.
Could I just hear from the commissioners on this particular item before we move on? Who feels like there ought to be a distinguishing and who doesn't? I know what my opinion is, but I'd like to hear just specifically on this.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I think kind of what Brandon is saying is the same thing. I guess I can easily look at section 1 of our revised ordinances. It's not saying it's commercial, it's just saying construction, demolition. So if my husband happens to be really handy and wants to sand the front of the house and repaint it. But I'm a little worried about the restriction of time. And as somebody else mentioned, I think working 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and on a summer day, if we come home and at 6 o'clock, I want to mow the lawn, I can't really do it, and if Saturday I'm at soccer and baseball games, it gives me Sunday, and well, now I can't do it. So I am concerned of that restrictiveness, but yet people move here because it's quiet and it's access to nature, and we want to preserve that. I do also look at the realistic logistical aspects of the homes are built in the 1920s to the 1950s. We're getting to a period where there's maintenance that needs to be done and upgrades for new people that are moving in. So maybe something that wasn't an issue 5 or 10 years ago may be more of an issue going forward. So we want to think of everybody and sort of the common good and serving the common good. And some people, unfortunately, are going to not like where the decisions are, but we have to sort of think in its totality, how are we benefiting the community to keep it quiet, but let people do maintenance that they need to do on a 7-day work week, so.
By the way, we're just trying to reflect where you're all going. We're not.
Well, and also try to make it jive with your general plan, which, you know, came up with these.
But those were standards. They weren't, thou shalt do this. They were standards.
Yes, the restricting homeowners from Sundays is an important point for me, because in my personal situation, my husband works 6 days a week, Sundays the day that he does a home maintenance, and he would be forced to violate the code. So San Anselmo, I know, has a restrictive ordinance, so I went and looked at the wording of their code. In the construction section, they have a provision where work performed by homeowners, hours can be extended, but so that's an option that we can do. We can, because I think it's a good idea, and for maybe for commercial to be not happen on Sunday, but allow the homeowners to be able to have that opportunity to do the maintenance on their homes on Sundays. Also, I had the same thought about on summertime, maybe there's a provision that we could extend the hours for homeowners for a few hours later during just a certain period of the day, of the year, to accommodate that. So, but I think we have an opportunity that we could provide a distinction between commercial and homeowner use.
Morgan, do you have one way or the other on the distinction between homeowner and commercial use?
Yeah, originally, I had some thoughts about, no commercial work on the weekend. I'd like to try to package this in as fairly general terms, like noise is noise, and the creator of the noise is the creator of the noise, and you have certain times you can do it and certain times you shouldn't. And I would be inclined to just keep it, the 9 to 4 hours on Saturday is probably enough, and nothing on Sunday. Now, this is making noise. You can still, work on your yard. You just can't fire anything up that's going to make a lot of noise. So my inclination is to, ultimately keep things as quiet as we feel we can. I think as time goes on, there are more and more people. More and more people are closer and closer to each other. Technology generates more noise. Look at the example of garbage pickup. It's always done in the wee hours of the morning. Originally, it was a truck going around, and there'd be some guys that had big burlap tarps, and they would dump the garbage into the tarp, carry it, and dump it into the truck. Didn't make much noise. Then it evolved into they had their own can that a machine would then dump into the truck, and now we've got so the technology has improved the situation, but it's generating a lot more noise. So I think we have to be aware of the fact that things just will slide into noisier and noisier, and we have to do what we can to keep that down as much as possible. If there's a groundswell and hue and cry from homeowners that they really want to do their yard maintenance on Sunday, perhaps we can change things. But it sure would be nice if Fairfax was known as like the quiet town. Because, we don't have many lawns here, but I remember, growing up back east, just every weekend, it was just, that's what I did. I mowed lawns for, pin money, and they're just lawnmowers going Saturday and Sunday all day long. So my inclination is just to leave it, those during the week hours, and and Saturday and not Sunday.
I think I originally was feeling the restrictiveness as well, because I was hearing it restricting homeowners of use of their property. I would be comfortable if the restriction is on the noise, not the use. I'm uncomfortable telling somebody you can't use a lawnmower on Sunday. I'm not uncomfortable telling them you can't use a noisy thing, whatever it is, you can't be noisy on Sunday. So I'm okay with the level of restriction in this as long as it's restricting the noise, not restricting a private property owner's use of their property. Because I think, I think, again, back to this idea of our role here is looking at the public good, and the issue here is not what somebody does on their property, but the impact of that action on the public. So I think where we ought to address it is what's the impact of somebody's action on their property to their neighbor, who is the public, and that's what we ought to be addressing. So for me, it's the noise, not the thing that they're doing. If they're playing loud music, if they're having a loud picnic, if their kids are screaming and it's over the decibel level, that's the public nuisance issue with respect to noise and keeping a quiet community. But I feel uncomfortable limiting how that noise is created and a person's use of their private property as long as it's not impacting the neighbors.
So, I mean, I agree with that, but when you read this, it's the use that's being affected.
And I'm suggesting to change that.
The requirement is, okay, you can go out and buy a new XYZ piece of equipment, and then you're creating this requirement that you have to go buy a special piece of equipment to be able to use what you want. And so I actually have a lot of concern over taking a day and saying you can't, because this is a use. This is not I think we've done a lot of discussion. We've had a lot of discussion. I think staff heard that. We didn't want to create, what was proposed to us is that the leaf blower should have a decibel limit, and every other thing we have in town is the effect on the neighbor. And so I think that's where we are.
I agree with you, and I guess maybe I wasn't really clear. I agree with the direction that we were going. I definitely do not want to get into the laundry list of the decibel of the blower and the decibel of the mower. No, that's not what I meant. I actually don't think we should get into
But I think the noise is
all.
just as difficult, because as soon as something happens on Sunday, everybody's going to start getting calls, and where's that line? And I think we have to be realistic about, we've had discussions about 7-Eleven operating 24 hours a day. And, we ended up passing that. And now we're willing to say we can't use power tools on Sundays. I think that's an extreme shift. And I think it's really important that exactly what you said, we're not restricting the rights of the property owners. It's okay to put buffers. Reduce, you don't have to go to 8 o'clock at night. I'm definitely not arguing for that. I would look at something like a 6 p.m. on weekdays, 5 p.m. on weekends, and not have Sundays and holidays called out as completely not allowed. Because there's a lot of people that's the only time you have a chance
But it just
to
kind
do
of,
the work.
I know a lot of this came aboard because of leaf blowers, and we were trying to discuss, leaf blowers, nail guns, power saws, right, the whole gamut. But the average power tool used on an average house, what level is the next door neighbor going to receive? Are they typically within this threshold? Or in every case of the main equipment that we're talking about, would everybody be in violation? So if we're saying we've got a 60 or 75 decibel level, I'm mowing my lawn, I'm next door to you, am I exceeding that level? I mean, are we really kind of forgetting, sort of the forest for the trees issue? We're getting so nitty gritty, but where are the violations going to come from? Our average power equipments that the homeowners are using really going to create the problem?
I think in the future, maybe they won't, but I think right now, to comply, I would not feel like I could use any of those pieces of equipment. I don't care what the decibel level is, because if anybody reads this, it's the operation of, not the noise from. It's in the noise ordinance, but it's the operation of that is the operative term for the restriction. So I think
And are you in
that's going to be
support
tied
of,
to the times.
are you in support of keeping it the operation of and not the noise from?
How do you police the noise from? I think that would become something that, we also have to look at, are we creating a situation that becomes impossible to either enforce or deal with? And I think, I think 7-Eleven's a very interesting experience where we actually asked the police to come in and give us information about how often these complaints happen. And to me, they didn't see any change whatsoever, but they're not measuring noise, even though they're the ones that would be the enforcing agent if it's happening. So I do see this as, even if it's the noise, it's a very nuanced approach, and it's not really something that becomes feasible, because if somebody wants to comply, they're going to read it as, I just can't do it because I'm not going to push the envelope. And other people will read it like, well, it's the noise, and you have to go out and get somebody to come measure it in order to, before I'm going to stop. And I think that's also a burden on the public. So I think the times, laying out times, there's nothing wrong with that. I think putting some additional constraints on the times, morning, evening, are fine, but I am very concerned about restricting days and saying that you can't do these things on these days, because I think that's the way it will come across, and I think that's the way it will be interpreted.
And I'm really in agreement with that sentiment.
Can I ask the staff the scenario that was given to us by a member of the public, somebody in there, the way that it's written, the operation of mechanically powered things, i.e., is really the intent that from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I can only use human and animal powered tools?
No, it's from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. you can use powered tools. It's at nighttime that you can't.
Okay, so after 5 p.m. I can only use human and animal powered tools.
That's the way it reads
regardless
now.
of how loud those human and animal powered tools are.
That's the way it reads now. That's why I was saying that if you intend it to limit any kind of human or animal powered tools, you need to change that heading. Because right now it just says domestic power tools. So if you want to stop someone from hitting rocks with a hoe, while they're doing their garden over and over for 2 hours, you need to change that heading.
And I guess that gets to my point, is my issue is it's the noise issue, not how the noise is being made. If it's made from somebody slamming a hammer on a rock for 2 hours, that's not okay. If somebody's quietly sanding in their garage, granted, they're not going to get a complaint probably, but technically that's illegal under the way that it's written here. And that just seems not quite right in what we're trying to accomplish.
But I would also say that we're looking at 2 paragraphs of the noise ordinance, and the entire noise ordinance is constructed the same way. So if you wanted to nuance the language, you'd have to nuance the language for the whole ordinance, not just for these sections, because it was all written as one large ordinance, not these 2 specific paragraphs.
Again, I think it's about noise. I know some communities have basically a rule: if it generates a complaint, you got to stop. I know when I lived in a nearby town a number of years ago, I planned this really elaborate party, contacted all the neighbors, but somebody complained, police came and shut it down, and the rules in this town were that if there was a complaint, you had to stop. So it seems to me, during the week, I don't think that's as much of a problem, but on the weekends, I think what Brandon's saying, the homeowner should have the ability to do these kinds of things. I would like to to not see as many commercial, leaf blowing outfits coming in, people that are moonlighting on the weekends. So it seemed to me that, Saturday and Sunday, there might be some sort of a limitation to those hours being either, done by homeowners or under their direct supervision, something like that. And then if there is a complaint on the weekend, that they should stop.
Complain about my noisy kids and get.
Can I just say something? You know, the thing about one complaint is you can have neighbors that have antagonized each other to the point where they will complain about anything. I've seen it happen over and over again, so I don't remember if I brought it up at your other meetings, but what the Humane Society does for barking dogs is it has to be 3 complaints from 3 different properties in order for it to be considered valid, because you do have neighbors that don't like each other and will complain about anything. So if you just make it so they stop from the first complaint, I think you're going to run into trouble. But
just a So one possible addition in terms of a change might be to also add in something, it's not just violating a decibel and or violation of a decibel level and or 3 complaints from 3. I mean, that possibly could be added in there. So it's a violation of decibel level and or 3 complaints from 3 different sources. Or 2 complaints, so that it gives you an option that you don't have to, because I know we have talked about, like, what are you supposed to have a sound meter? The police have to come out with a sound meter. So this would give an alternate recourse for people to make you stop. That's not 1, but 2 or 3. And I would be in favor of something like that, adding in that.
Yeah, I would definitely be in favor of that. I think the other thing about enforceability, kind of getting down to the bottom line, even though the effect that we're talking about is noise and the effect of noise, is that if you've set times where things are allowed, it makes it much easier to enforce when you're outside of those time periods. So, I mean, and then it is very straightforward and it's easy to interpret and easy for everybody to understand. And, you know, then you don't need the sound meter. You just, these tools are not allowed at 9 p.m. and that's pretty straightforward. So
I still one just procedural question or issue that I personally have in trying to approve this tonight is not having it presented as a track change with the ordinance. I'm having a hard time understanding the flow of how these amendments fit into the overall ordinance, so it's making it hard for me to.
How about if we bring it back to you with track change?
That would be a helpful addition, to bring it back with track changes.
so can you guys vote on whether you want Sundays prohibited? Because I'm still not clear how the majority of you feel, whether you want to allow the construction on Sundays for homeowners but not commercial. Somehow I'm not.
I don't think we have consensus. That's
Okay.
that's why.
Well,
I just know, I personally, just speaking for me, the issue for me is the noise level nuisance, not who is making it, commercial or individual, or how it's being
Yeah.
made.
And
But I know I'm not.
You may not be able to reach consensus. So if you get to a point where no one has any new thoughts, you can ask for a vote, and then it'll be the majority. That'll be the way you go, because you may not be able to get consensus.
And conversely, if you'd like to punt till the next meeting when Shelby's back,
We can do that
which
too.
could make it even more difficult in terms of a majority.
But it might be good to
anyway,
hear from her. She
it's
does
easy-
deal with landscaping, so she might have some.
And it's easy to redact that piece in the language.
So I would say, I think, while my sentiment is for that there's some difference, I don't know that we can distinguish it, and I think it would be very hard to come up with language that would make those, like, the homeowner and then commercial, because there's homeowners that can't do the work and they need to hire somebody to do the work. If they're, under the supervision of, well, you could probably say anybody's under the supervision of, even if they're just coming in on the weekend. So I think to me, that's a hard one. I agree with the sentiment, but I don't know how we get it into the code. I think where we started out when this came about was, it should be really simple. It's something that really is about the time of day, and we really kind of went back to that. And I think the thing that surprised me was the Sundays. You know, and I think we can tweak the times a little bit, and I have far less concern about that than I do about the Sunday. But I think everything else, I think you got a lot of the discussions we had. I think you could probably find, and I think it would be good to kind of look at the overall code to see if there's a place for whether it's 2 complaints or 3 complaints, because it would be, you know, that is a way of sort of creating a bar, and that would be at any time of day, even if it's middle of the day. If there's just something crazy going on, you could still, you know, it would be the decibel level kind of thing. Right, so.
Yeah, I guess I keep coming back to the Sunday thing. I tend to run my dog just about every day of the week, and, you know, I see people on Sundays that are neighbors that I know who work 6 days a week, and so Sunday, again, is that day that they're home and they're trimming the trees and they're doing their yard work. I wonder if a more restrictive hour on Sunday, 10 to 3 or 10 to 4, may be something that we'd want to consider.
Another suggestion is, looking at this other ordinance, is they limit the length of time you can use the device at one time. So maybe that could help solve an issue as far as noise, as far as if it can only happen for a certain length of time.
And is that currently, I think there's something about 7 out of the continuous 15 minutes or 3 out of the 15 minutes. How does that fit into these how does that fit into the 10 to 3 timeline? Or is it?
Right now is using a tool which is repeated intermittently for a duration of 15 minutes or more. That gets. Sorry, Jim. That's in there, but boy.
Does what you have here trump that? In other words, if you say, thou shalt not run your lawnmower on Sundays from 10 to 3, it doesn't matter whether you run it for 7. I mean, that's why not looking at it all together, I'm not quite sure what.
I think it's in there because if someone really had a problem, they could call and the police could maybe point to that. But I mean, if you have a construction job, you've got different power tools going. I don't know how a neighbor would know that it's one tool operating for more than 15 minutes. So, I mean, that's fine. It's in there, and you can add it or take it out, but I think it's really hard to enforce.
Is the language that you can't operate the tool, that the noise shall not be emitted for more than 7 out of the 15? So it's that the noise shall not exceed decibels?
No, it's prohibited. That's a prohibited act. Owning, well, that's actually an animal.
You know, that's tied to an animal, that's it, not to any pieces of equipment.
I think there was something tied to noise decibels shall not exceed blah, blah, blah for X number of minutes in.
There's a table, but that's the minutes thing is how you would make the determination of it's exceeding the decibel level for a period of time over, like 15 minutes over an hour period. Right. But that's more of those chronic noise effects. And again, you have to have a meter and you have to measure it for the entire time to make any determination.
Right, but that, if we institute you can't do it at all between 10 to 3, then that table would only apply after 3 o'clock? Yeah. Okay.
And this is the table that's already in the code, and it's
right.
Residential from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The decibel level should be below 40. You know, I mean, it sort of steps up. If you're in downtown, right, it's going to be a higher level even at night. But again, that takes the way to enforce it is measurement, and I think the way that these prohibited acts section and the exemption sections are written, even though they're meant for noise, they're really written as here's when you can do it, here's when you can't. And I think it's extreme situations where you'd run into kind of having to go out and find the decibel issue. The other thing to consider, and I don't really know, I was thinking about it, when it gets hot in the summer, in the afternoon, there's a lot more dust than if you were doing something earlier in the morning. And so if you create, like, say 10 to 3, you're actually forcing things to happen when you're going to make things worse than if you, I actually think you could over restrict it and make it more of a problem than if it's, I think Saturday, Sunday, 9 to 4 is fine. 9 to 5 would be fine to me, but I think if you restrict it so much, you might get a lot of things happening at 2 in the afternoon, which is probably the worst time to be creating dust.
Well, maybe we do Saturday and Sunday, whatever, 9 to 4, pick some hours. My concern on the weekend is trying to limit the commercial operators. I don't know how we can do that, but I think the homeowners, the hope is that on the weekends, homeowners hopefully would have some consideration for their neighbors. I just would like to figure out a way to limit the commercial operation.
I mean, I would wonder, and I just can't imagine this working, is through the business license, that the business license, you can only work Monday through Saturday, and you can't actually work on Sunday with your business license for the town of Fairfax. I think then you'd get all kinds of other problems. But instead of writing an ordinance in here, would that be another avenue, sort of like the education piece? Is that an avenue to kind of reach that, the constituency that is possibly of concern?
I would recommend if you're going to try and restrict commercial operation, you should put it in the noise ordinance and then echo it in the business license perhaps, if that's the direction you're going to go.
Well, it seems like some people wanted to be able to do would be able to have somebody come over to their place and do whatever it is they're going to do with tree cutting, what have you, so they could watch them do it. What I have a problem that people, in their scheduling, professional companies in their scheduling just kind of get lazy about it and say, oh yeah, well, we didn't get it done during the week, so we'll just go out there on Saturday or Sunday, whatever, so-and-so says he'll do it. And I don't think that should be so discretionary. You could have there are some exemptions, I don't know. That's why I mentioned something like, commercial operator under the supervision of the homeowner. But I think the homeowner should be involved on the weekend. And I don't think that the commercial company should just be able to assume they can come out whenever they want on the weekend. Because as Chris Lang mentioned the other day, it's often just guys that are moonlighting for their regular job.
Well, you could prohibit commercial on Sunday, and there's always an exemption if a homeowner feels they have to oversee their commercial person doing work on Sundays. They come to Jim and they explain why they can't do it on Saturday and they have to have a commercial company out there on Sunday.
Not
But I
sensing,
think you
not
have-
sensing consensus. Can we move on to another topic?
Yeah, it'll be like,
I don't want to, I just don't quite know.
I think you'd have to allow commercial businesses to at least have one day on the weekend,
we
because
could do
as Shelley
something
said, there's some
like
people.
a fishing license. If you're fishing on a stream in California, you have to wear your license in plain view. So if anybody's doing any work in Fairfax, they have to wear their business license around in plain view.
Ultimately, I don't know, you're more involved with the chamber. I mean, ultimately, it seems to me that it's the homeowner's ultimate responsibility to be in charge and take responsibility for the acts of vendors that they hire on public damage or public whatever. So it seems to me that if there are independent contractors out there doing things, that it's really the homeowner's responsibility to not let them just willy-nilly do things, and that it's the homeowner that's on the hook for not keeping their rogue landscapers under control.
That might come under what Shelby was talking about, the education idea that homeowners are encouraged to try to, if they can, to have the work done, during the week. And if it's not possible to arrange it any other way, then it can happen on the weekend, but it's not encouraged.
I would like to say, can we move on to what Shelby had mentioned and the issue of the dust and the health issues and the education piece, and if anyone has any thoughts on that. I had a couple of questions, but before we make some kind of decision, having some conversation on that.
I think one of the things that we had discussed in one of the prior meetings was the amount of dust that can actually come up from rakes and brooms and things can actually be worse than what's coming from the leaf blower as it pertained, so.
I also had a question about, is there anywhere else in our town code that speaks to one neighbor causing hazardous conditions to another neighbor, or dumping stuff on another? What's the recourse if I dump stuff on another neighbor's property or cause hazardous conditions by digging up a hole that's got lead in it or something like that? Is there anywhere else in the code that speaks to hazardous? I know in the safety element of the town general plan, that's where that hazardous stuff is dealt with, and so I didn't know if you know of anything there.
There's a litter section in the town code that says you can't put litter on someone else's property.
Would dust be considered litter? Or could we add the word, I wouldn't, it doesn't fit in noise, or whether we just go with education.
I know you're not allowed to discharge gutter water across the property line, that kind of thing. So if somebody's, run a pipe out onto your property, that's not okay.
And I'm comfortable, if everyone else is comfortable just leaving it as an education thing, we don't have to go with pulling out other parts of the ordinance. I'm just.
So as a member of the GPIC, I think you're probably dealing with, there's actually the town plan has tons of things that are educational. Right. And there was a lot of discussion around, you could package this with, you don't want to put things into the storm drains. Well, if you're blowing leaves, if you're blowing them on the road, you're actually doing that directly. So I think there's a lot of crossover with those types of things. Right. And I would hope that through the general plan, kind of those education pieces that are they're kind of strewn throughout, but they need to be one package, and I think this is part of that package, that it's respecting your neighbors, it's noise. If you get a lot of dust in the air, you're going to get as much in your house as your neighbor too. So it's not the best thing to be generating anyway. But I think I think we can't create ordinances around education. We have to create ordinance around protecting or putting constraints, and then work hard to educate.
So that I am sensing consensus on, that the approach be an educational approach where it comes to the dust and that kind of stuff. So I think that you are on the right track on that, and I think the only further addition that I'm hearing, which I also agree with, is to maybe bundle it all together with some sort of pamphlet to homeowners rather than have it as a whole bunch of little bits and pieces. Jim, do you have a question on that? You're sitting forward now.
I think that's a lot less of your time than taking calls anytime anybody wants an exemption on Sundays. At home, yeah. So the only other thing and we haven't thrown out hours, but I felt like, I'll just put this out there so everybody has them. I think the hours right now of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays, I think that's a little tight. I think that could work in the winter, but I think it's tight in the summer. And I think 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. it's okay, but in summer, that's mid-afternoon, really. I would say 5 p.m. The other way to handle it would be to keep these hours, but kind of do what Laura suggested, where you could have sort of the daylight savings, add 1 hour to the afternoon during daylight savings. So if Congress changes daylight savings time again, we don't have to change it again. But it's just tied to daylight savings. If we get rid of daylight savings, well, I guess we'd have to reevaluate. But that would be maybe the way to create that flexibility without maybe changing the hours that are proposed here. I'd feel okay with that.
Did I hear you correctly that during daylight savings you'd add an hour to the weekdays?
An hour
to the weekdays?
to both. I would just add an hour to the,
To both.
to both.
And may I ask for clarification on Sunday? Do I hear a consensus going towards some sort of hours for homeowners on Sunday? How about if we
I don't
add?
think we can separate the two. I don't,
Okay.
I think it'd be parsing it out so difficult. The only language I can think of is under direct supervision by the homeowner.
I'm not sure we have consensus on that.
That'd be hard to get.
I feel more comfortable if we add in the 3 complaints from 3 different sources, or even 2 complaints. I think that might address the rogue landscaper issue and the commercial issue, because it does give an additional public recourse that doesn't require having the police come out and
Are we
measure.
talking Sundays?
So you're okay?
At any, if we have that at any time, I think that might help mitigate the Sunday issue so that we don't have to differentiate between commercial and homeowner.
So you'd allow the stuff to occur on Sundays as long as that complaint section was
Was
in there?
part of it.
Okay.
And I feel like that would mitigate the need to call out commercial because we added in that additional mitigation
So,
personally.
and again, you're talking about Saturday and Sunday or just Sunday?
Saturdays and Sundays.
Saturday and Sunday, thank you.
I don't know,
And
Commissioner Hall, how you feel?
I would ask you to get, you might want to see if you have a comfort level of consensus so that we can write that with.
I was going to ask Commissioner Hall how he felt about what I just said, since you were the most vocal one
Yeah,
here about
I think we
delineating.
could go Saturday and Sunday, I guess 9 to 4. I think that'd be generous.
And then how do you feel about the extra hour during daylight savings? Then it would be 9 to 5.
I don't know, in the summer, people have their windows open and they can hear more.
How about if we leave that blank and you can fill it in with a vote?
Good
Yeah,
idea. Leave them
I
blank.
use same hours year round.
What I'm hearing a proposal is, you had mentioned weekdays 9 to 4, and we're also talking Saturdays and Sundays 9 to 4, so I'm kind of hearing just a 9 to 4. I'm just wondering what but you were proposing.
So I was saying weekdays 8 to 6, weekends and holidays, 9 to 5. I would be comfortable with 9 to 4 on weekends and holidays. I think the windows open in the afternoon is
And again,
true.
with the same caveat in terms of daylight savings?
I think the daylight savings that's kind of an option. I think that creates a little more flexibility for realism, living on the ground and trying to, when you're going to get work done. But at the same time, I wouldn't go either way.
So I'm just confused. When you said weekdays 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., that means you can't do any of this stuff or you can?
You can operate from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay. I know, because
These
I'm
are mirrors
confused
of
when
the
you,
two.
exactly when we're
Right.
talking, I'm confused.
So, yeah.
So you can do it from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays, and you can do it from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekends and holidays.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, I think
Okay.
my bigger issue is being able to do it operate on Sundays and holidays.
Other 2 commissioners? Would you like to weigh in on this proposal?
No, I agree. I could not support not having Sundays included as part of the ordinance.
Yeah, I like the slightly less restrictive hours as well, the 8 to 6 and 9 to 4. You can come on my lawn on Christmas.
And I support that as well. I still personally have an issue with saying that you can't use a hand sander after those, outside of those hours, but I need to look at the whole ordinance in context to see what that logistically means to the entire ordinance. I still don't feel comfortable approving the ordinance and telling people that the only thing that you can use after 6 p.m. is a hand drill and a horse cart. So that's just my personal opinion, and I need to look at the whole ordinance to do that.
I just want to tell you a story that, sorry, we did have a homeowner who worked on his house on the weekends for 12 years, and his neighbors were going crazy. So that's just a true story.
That sounds like 2 complaints.
I was going to say, he
Yeah.
probably got more than 3 complaints, which means he should have.
You know, the old weekend warrior syndrome can really be tiring for a neighbor.
And I'm not arguing, in fact, I'm actually arguing for that. I think the issue is the noise. If he was completely silent, we shouldn't care when and how, this is my personal opinion, if he were not making a nuisance, it shouldn't be a problem what he's doing. If he's making a nuisance, he should have been stopped and somebody should have gone. And then you could fall back on those,
Silently
either a decibel because of a police report or 2 complaints, and therefore you stop because that's deemed a nuisance by your neighbors. And it's the noise that's the nuisance, that's the issue, not what you're doing and when you're doing it, is my opinion, so.
Well, we need to distinguish between exterior and interior noise. And I believe I think the code does provide, I think that's mostly what the code's dealing with is exterior.
The code deals with the receiving of the noise, so the issue is the person who's hearing it, not the thing that's generating it. So it talks about the fence line, the measuring of the noise at the fence line of the neighbor who's receiving the noise, which I think is also in line with the 3 complaints, because that's also complaints from the receivers of the noise. So it seems to align well with the approach in here, which is kind of on the receiving end.
Because I saw there's a provision, San Anselmo allows work at any time as long as you do not exceed 5 decibels at the nearest property line. So they're providing a provision for interior noise. If you're quiet, then you're allowed, they don't have any restriction on hours. And also from the first packet that we were handed with Ross, they allow work done solely in the interior of a building or structure, the performance of which does not create any noise which is audible from the exterior of the building or structure. So they allow exemptions for those type of situations.
It seems like that would make sense.
Would you read that one again, the second one?
Work done solely in the interior of a building or structure, the performance of which does not create any noise which is audible from the exterior of the building or structure. And that's an exemption from the allowed hours.
Commissioner Caroline, could you forward that information to us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Am I wrong, was the idea of the complaints only a thing that happened on the weekends?
No, I was
think
saying
it
that the
should be.
complaints are 24/7. If you get 3 complaints at any time, then 3 noise complaints, then that means you have to stop.
But, Gelati's working on that driveway over at 62 Valley, and they got heavy equipment, it might be loud, and they've been doing it for a while. You can't shut that job down.
Well, I'm assuming that job has a specific, that's a good question. If you do, what is the current situation if we've approved a project or you've approved a project and they're working under?
Well, I think if you included that thing about 3 complaints, what would probably happen is it would be shut down, and then someone would have to come to staff and to the planning director, and he would evaluate it. If it's a project that has to happen, then they'd have to be granted an exception despite the complaints.
Could you add something to it that would say 3 complaints from 3 different sources, except where a project has been granted the right
Open
to
building
do
permit?
construction or something like that?
I think you guys are,
It's getting a little
it's very easy to sort of drill down and get in the woods on this stuff. I would remind you of the old Irish saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think the complaint, if I could make a recommendation, it seems like the weekends where the quality of life is more tenuous for the population is where you might want to focus your attention. And then things seem to be working pretty good now during the week. There are interruptions to the ambiance when you have major construction projects going on. You're moving in a direction of mitigating that impact during the week by lessening the hours. And then perhaps it sounds like you may even increase the hours during daylight savings and decrease it when it's darker earlier. So I would dissuade you from going back into the area of over-regulating things where we don't have an issue.
Okay, so I would amend what I said. I would say 3 complaints from 3 different sources outside of allowable hours, meaning nights and weekends.
And of course, they're going to get shut down if they're working outside those hours anyway. They're not allowed to be working. One complaint should shut them down. It shouldn't be a threshold. If you're setting restrictions on when you can be working, those are the restrictions on when you can be working. You're now creating a sort of an implied variance that if you don't get 3 complaints, then they can break the rules on when they have to stop.
So you missed the meeting, Jim, but when this first came to us, we were all about making it as simple as possible. And I think we're still pretty close, but we're always good at talking
So
through all of the options. I think you bring up a really good point, and it's figuring out how do we make it applicable on weekends and holidays when it's during the operable hours kind of thing. And I think to get to your point, Shelley, I think if you wanted to think about defining the word operation for this section, that might be the way to handle it, if you want to. Because I think that's really getting at what you're talking about. I think the practicality of it is the operation. I think trying to redefine it might be, it's just being more explicit about what that really means. And I would also say that, Ross, I mean, an exemption like that makes sense because it kind of creates that understanding that this isn't an absolute, you can do things, but you can't make noise and it can't be perceived. So that's an easy exemption, I think, to add to the exemption list.
And I will leave it to staff to figure out where and how to fit in our consensus regarding the number of complaints. And if you want to propose where you think the most streamlined approach is to add that sentiment in, that would be great.
Okay, great. I think we have pretty good understanding where you're going on this. Not that there won't be changes when you actually get down to the voting.
Okay, so we've done the hours, we've done complaints, we've done the issue about education. Were there any other areas that seem like we did not have consensus on? I didn't really see any. Does anyone else have a topical area that they felt needed to be addressed? No? And you all feel like you have enough direction?
I think so. We'll be watching this tape or listening to this, watching this tape again, I think. But yeah, and we'll also prepare a resolution to see if we can get to the finish line with you all next time.
Okay. Do we need to take an action to continue this or no?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we threw out the options, so I think you're just moving
So
along
we can
those
just move
lines.
on to,
Yeah.
okay. So hearing no other disagreement, we can move on to discussion item number 5.
And may I ask for a slight break while I set up the equipment to see if we can get the matrix on the screen since it wasn't in your packet?
Great. Let's take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, would you like me to introduce this real briefly?
For those of us just joining us,
Are we back? Yeah.
we're back from our short commercial break. Go ahead.
We're back in order. Okay, so Madam Chair, you asked that we agendize this item to bring it back to the attention of the Planning Commission. In the back of the general plan, which again for the public is available on the town's website. We also have hard copies at the front, a hard copy at the front counter in the library. It's a very voluminous document, and there's also a large appendix. And thank you, Brandon. And if you recall, at the super committee retreat, thanks to the previous general plan advisory chair, Bruce Ackerman, he put together this amazing matrix, which is in the very last item in the appendix of the general plan. And this matrix categorizes the approximately 500 programs called for in the general plan. And the matrix divides it by years of, targeted years of implementation, and those entities responsible for it. You all are now not only the Planning Commission, you are the Design Review Board. The good news is Design Review has 1 page of programs and only 1 item in year 1, which we're just coming to the end of year 1 of the adopted general plan. But the bad news is the Planning Commission, or excuse me, this is building and I think I hit actually building and planning. The Planning Commission, which I'll find here, has a little bit more onerous list of requirements. And why am I not seeing it here? Help me. Here we go, Planning Commission. Did I misspeak? The good news, three pages. So I think the exercise tonight, and correct me, Shelley, Chair Hamilton, if I'm wrong, was we just wanted to take a few minutes tonight to go down the list for the Planning Commission, and what the general plan implementation did was they bifurcated the matrix to responsible entity, and that ranges from the Department of Planning and Building Services to the Planning Commission / Design Review Board, to the Town Manager, to the Public Works Department, to the Fire Department, even to the library. And there's a whole list. In fact, I can back up if you like and show you. That was this list here is all the different entities. And we are disseminating this information out to these different entities. So, and I keep losing the Planning Commission. Here we go, down at the bottom, right? Oh. Thank you. So I believe what you wanted to accomplish tonight was to go down this list very briefly and just refamiliarize folks with what the targets of the first year, and again, we just passed the 1-year mark. These were targets, and it was an impossibility from the beginning that we would ever meet these targets. So what we've all been trying to do, both on staff and in the General Plan Implementation Committee, is triage our work. What are the thou shalt things that have to occur? For example, we're required by law, ideally within 1 year of adoption of the general plan, to bring the zoning ordinance into compliance with the general plan. Well, we actually succeeded in passing a new zoning map with the document, so the zone changes that were prescribed in the general plan occurred, but we have to go through the zoning ordinance and update the language to be in sync with the general plan. And we are working very hard with our limited staff and limited consultants on doing just that. We're making suggested revisions that will be brought to you all on the central commercial zone, the planned district development zone, and depending on how far we can get in this first round, we might tweak some of the parking requirements, and there's a couple other sections that we may be able to touch. But again, in the General Plan Implementation Committee, as well as with staff, we don't have the wherewithal to meet all these targets on time. And finally, the approximately, I think it's 494 programs, actually, approximately 500. Most of those, when the super committee went through and prescribed a time period for implementation, which is a requirement of the general plan also, it was heavily laden in the first year. So about, I don't know, 60, 70% of all the programs are targeted for the first year. And of course, that would, in a perfect world, that'd be great, but there's just no way with limited funds and limited staff that Fairfax can do that. So correct me if I'm wrong, Chair Hamilton, but the idea was to just go through these and refamiliarize yourself as the Planning Commission body with what ideally we would be focusing on right now. And again, staff is working very hard and diligently to meet its requirements. And finally, I've blown this up so you can see just the part of the matrix that's talking about the plans in year one, and this is the bifurcated matrix for your body. And that's it, yeah.
Sorry. The only thing that I would add is that we will be sending this specific thing out to the Planning Commission. It's public because it's already, it's up on the website, but just the section for the Planning Commission with a cover letter that does, again, reiterate what are we supposed to do with this, so that we'll come back at another meeting. Part of what the General Plan Implementation Committee, which I'm a part of, needs to do is report back to the town council every so often, and we have a report coming up. And what that report is telling the town council what the progress has been made, because the Implementation Committee is like an ombudsman oversight committee to make sure that we are progressing along what we said we're going to do, and if not, why not, and who's doing what. And so part of the responsibility of that committee is reporting out, and there's no way that that committee can do that on its own. And so that's why we're asking all of the responsible parties to come back to us with their report on what of their things, what's been done, what's yet to be done. And so we need to come back as a body, having reviewed this, triage in terms of having a discussion about prioritization, knowing that you can see the numbers up there. There's 145 on that list in year one. Knowing that we're not going to get to all 145 in the next 5 minutes, what would you prioritize? So it's really coming back for a discussion of what do you think we really need to hit first? What have we already done? And we need to come back to that fairly quickly to the implementation committee so that they can report out to the town council.
And I think I actually passed it out once in the past. I thought I hadn't, forgive me if I hadn't. And I'll probably do it with you all in a less formal way without the letter. I'll just send it to you in the next packet. And so the idea, again, is to drill down and get your priorities set on what you want us to accomplish in the near future on this list. Do you want me to just run down them real quick? I mean, I can scroll down. Yeah.
I think you just scroll down, and they're organized by the different sections. So if there's any question about, land use, housing, those kinds of things.
And if you notice, several of these actually have other entities that are, it's just not necessarily just the Planning Commission. It's often, if you notice here, it's my department, Planning and Building, and Town Council, for example, on several of these. So you're not the Lone Ranger in every one of these implementations. But again, what I look for when I scroll through here is what are the thou shalts? What are mandated by law? What are the highest priorities for health and safety in the town? What are the hot button issues that we really need to address right away in a perfect world? So for example, map and describe the first one, map and describe the town center plan area. We actually have in the general plan itself a draft of where the town center area is, and we might want to modify that as we approach the town center plan process in the beginning of next year. So that's not necessarily something that we're going to have to take care of right away. The second one, revised zoning ordinance to allow limited neighborhood serving commercial uses. That's sort of a bigger picture revision to the zoning ordinance. That's not a thou shalt. The third one, change the zoning designation for Tenaluma. That's been accomplished with the adoption of the map already. The Lutheran Church, the same thing. Change the zoning for School Street. That's been accomplished. Create an inventory of underdeveloped and developed parcels. That actually was done during the development of the general plan for members of the Open Space Committee. Improve the efficiency of traffic flow along Sir Francis Drake Highway. Well, that's an interesting goal for year one. Develop town ordinances to encourage development of gray water systems. We've already adopted a gray water rain catchment system. Provide residential and commercial property owners incentives to utilize gray water and other water conservation methods. I would say water bills are a good incentive. Modify existing ordinances to require no net increase in stormwater runoff with new development and remodels. That's actually something that's coming down from the state right now, and our building officials attending courses to deal with that. Other counties actually are way ahead of us with implementing that. Update the lot coverage definition to include driveways as part of the calculation, and evaluate reduction in allowed lot coverage by ordinance to promote reduction in impervious surface with existing and new development. Part of that is being addressed with the new runoff regulations that we'll be putting forward. The part on the driveway is something that will be debated in a later stage of updating the zone. Enact green building ordinance to reduce amount of waste created by construction activities. We actually, with the adoption of the last building code, there was a section that was added by the state called Cal Green, which is the first cut at green building ordinance in the statewide, and it was that came down at the same time as the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership that I'm on was creating a model green building ordinance. And unbeknownst to us, if we had gone ahead and adopted that green building ordinance, we would have had to gone back and amend it to adjust with Cal Green. So this is partly accomplished, and we will be coming forward with a recommended further green building ordinance along the lines of Build It Green, if you know what that is. There's sort of two approaches. There's LEED certification, which is very onerous and expensive, and then there's Build It Green, which is a point system. And we'll be coming back with recommended language and points on that. Conduct an annual housing element review. We do that by law. In fact, between now and the end of the month, I'm prescribed by law to fill in the blanks on it now. The Department of Housing and Community Development actually has an online process for doing that, something we do every year, so yes, we're doing that. Develop an environmental checklist and development standards for use by project applicants. In a perfect world, we could get on that, but it's on the list. Develop and adopt a definition and measurement of wide-scale neighborhood destruction. That's probably becoming more important because we are in uncharted territory with the fire danger we're living in today. And if you remember the certain rebuild of a house that burned down at, was it 62 Valley? And the individual actually changed the design of the house, and from our code it looked like a new building, so we were requiring a wider driveway, and it was a more onerous permit process. If in fact there was mass destruction in the town from a mass fire, what this is saying is if there was some way for people to have as-built plans after the disaster, find a way to slipstream their rebuilding if they're rebuilding what they had. And part of the incentive for allowing this is to not end up like Oakland, where when people rebuild, they completely max out the sites and it becomes a whole different ambiance to the neighborhood. This is an effort to help facilitate rebuilding after a natural disaster, but facilitate those entities that want to keep the historic character of the town, and then allow for public review for those rebuilding efforts that want to build a bigger house or a different house, which only seems fair when you're impacting neighbors beyond what was there before. If I remember correctly, that was the sentiment from the General Plan Advisory Committee. Adopt an extension of existing 1-year non-conforming rebuild exemption to 5 years when wide-scale destruction occurs. That means that when someone comes in and they get their building permits, give them a little bit longer to actually perform. We have a very prescriptive ordinance right now. It's basically 1 year, then you lose your entitlements. There's a way to have maybe a 6-month extension at staff's discretion, but after that, 1.5 years, you basically lose your entitlements. You have to go back through everything. Prepare public information material. This is now, if you look, the elements are described by the first letters. So now we're in the housing element. Conduct community outreach, establish neighborhood meeting protocol procedures.
Can I put a pause for you? Just for people, when you're going back and reviewing this document, if this little teeny phrase doesn't quite make sense, like prepare public information material to what end? If you go back into the document itself, all of these programs are under goals, and so you can then go back and say, oh, what was the goal of that public information, or what was the goal of the community outreach? Because some of these are just so short it doesn't make sense unless you read it in context of those goals.
For the purposes of the matrix, but they're further explained in the document. And then other good news, we have overlap between certain elements. For example, you saw before in the land use section, rezone the Lutheran Church property, rezone Lima. We've done that. Rezone all highway, and this is mentioned now in the second area of the housing element aside from land use, so we've accomplished this already. Rezone all highway commercial zones to central commercial with the adoption of the new map in the general plan. That was done, and again, we're working on recommended language changes to central commercial, which will be a little bit more modern, if you will, or up-to-date. Our code is very antiquated in listing specific uses that are allowed by conditional use permit. That's very antiquated, so we'll be talking about categories of use and looking at more sort of a hybrid between, well, I am going too deep in detail. We'll be making recommendations on commercial, essential commercial. And then let's see, we're actually getting through these pretty quick. Rezone School Street, we did. Revise the town's zoning ordinance, that's what we're in their way doing. Roll over the second unit amnesty ordinance without sprinkler requirement, and I believe it talks about parking also when you go to that section. The town shall prepare a pedestrian plan for the downtown area. We actually applied for a grant for that with the OBEG grant that we did succeed in getting $300,000 allocated for, which we have to get our housing element certified in order to get. We applied for a critical path analysis. It was Councilman Neal's suggestion that did not get the funding, but it's a noble idea, and we'll continue to pursue funding grants to do that. The town should prepare a risk assessment for pedestrian routes in the downtown area. That is, I think, a higher priority in terms of hazards and trips, because it can be quite litigious for a town when downtown sidewalks become in such disrepair that it invites lawsuits. The town should prepare a plan and program to make continuous network of quiet streets and alleys for traversing the downtown. The town shall identify, now we're into the town center element, the town shall identify sites and sites for bicycle staging. Now we're in the conservation, establish a creekside development zone. Under noise, incorporate a noise analysis in the town center plan. And again, the town center element, which was the one optional element in Fairfax's general plan, there are 7 prescribed elements by the state. Towns are allowed to add elements, and this town chose to add a town center element. In that town center element, it calls for the creation of a town center plan. Okay, after the adoption of the general plan, we will be starting the planning process to have those workshops in the fall, and we plan on having those workshops begin after the beginning of the year. And we'll be talking about some very challenging issues like managed parking and or the disposition of Bolinas vis-a-vis pedestrianization, whether it be on a permanent basis or a temporary basis. And stay tuned for that wonderful, lively discussion. The town shall identify, incorporate noise reduction guidelines in the green building ordinance when adopted. Interesting that we'll be revisiting that in that case. Revised project applications require a noise analysis if the proposed development would be exposed to sound levels exceeding the noise ordinance level. Here we are back at noise. And finally, again, under land use, identify, catalog, and map public easements. And conservation, implement the recommendations of safe routes to school, and the town shall consider bicycle and pedestrian crossing design and locations as a priority along Broadway, Center, and Bolinas. And as far as Broadway and Center is concerned, we actually finished, after this program was developed in the early draft of the plan, we did succeed in, I believe, August of 10 to have the town council approve the parkade circulation study, and that was the basis upon which the OBEG grant for $300,000 was approved. So we have that plan, and we have the funding committed to us, provided we can get our housing elements certified. So those are the 3 pages for the Planning Commission. Mine is, for our Department of Planning and Building Services, is 7 pages long. And of course, we also piggyback with a lot of the other entities that be our department. So I think that was the exercise you wanted to accomplish tonight, Chair?
Yep, that was the review, and if there's any kind of overarching macro questions, this will come back to us with a discussion for prioritization. I don't
I don't know if you have the timeline in front of us, but it will, we need, just as far as people knowing what they need to do with this, we do need to get it out with a please get back to us by X date, or get back to you. For Brown Act, we'll all give our comments back to you and then get all those together when we get back, I guess. Or we're going to do it in person.
We don't have the luxury of stopping. We're still moving ahead. And as your staff, my priority is, my aim is to prioritize these things with you and to continue to work on them with you. So some of these we've accomplished already. Some of them are underway. And I guess the subject of conversation in the future, when we come back to this as a discussion item, will be, am I missing anything that you think should be a priority for your body that I've not put at the top of the list?
Go ahead, questions?
Yeah, I guess the other thing would be, a lot of these were sequential, so they involve multiple parts of the operation, and a lot of them say planning commission because an ordinance would come through, but they also say planning and building. So it'd be good, like you were saying, you've got what's being worked on now with the zoning element, and those things you're covering a lot of these things. They are going to all come, eventually it's going to come to us as one package. So I think just kind of taking this straight pull out of a spreadsheet that was made in 2010, and whether we do it together or whether you can do it beforehand, kind of articulating what's already covered, what are the open things, because, obviously we'll prioritize the things that are already being done. And I would hope that we do see that zoning.
Next, I'll tell you what, I would be glad to follow up with letting you know again in some other way of calling it out, a checklist or percentage done or target date for you. And then you can fill in the blanks on anything that needs to be moved up on the priority list.
And I do think it's, there were lots of discussions about, looking at our ordinance and saying, the green building code in our ordinances. It's embarrassing, actually, because all it does is allow bigger development, which is kind of counterintuitive to the green building code. I don't recall, at least my booklet, having the new Cal Green standards in it. So I think it's just a matter of, maybe it's a little bit more education for us as well to know what's already been done, where it is in our town code. Because what I'm hearing from you and from Shelley is that we need to identify the things that we're going to take on to start, things that you guys can't take on. Are there specific, is it a green building code, or is it a certain element that's in there that we would all want to sort of say, yeah, you know what, we want to do this and we're willing to have additional meetings or whatever it takes to get something like that put together.
And I think I would chime in, looking at the sort of paramount importance of our housing element and getting that done and certified, because there's so many other things that can fall into place once that's done, that any of the housing components maybe get prioritized.
And I misspoke actually when I was giving you a report in the last meeting or two. We will definitely be bringing the housing element narrative amendments to you. And we may ask to do a joint meeting, definitely between the Affordable Housing Committee and the General Plan Implementation Committee, and depending on how long it takes to get that narrative completed, I may actually ask for a special meeting between those two bodies and you, just to expedite this, because we have to, well, it's a long story, but we have a tight timeline to get the housing element narrative through HCD, and we have to actually, I just found this out yesterday, we have to actually update the planned district development language, which means an ordinance, first reading, second reading, and 30 days after the second reading, prior to the adoption of the amended housing element. And then those both go up to HCD to get their certification. So it's going to get the ordinance language approved, I have to go through your review and approval and the town council's review and approval, and then the first, second reading and 30 days after that. And then hopefully that 30 days later, when it goes into effect, the housing element amendment would be on the council's table also. It's a Rubik's Cube getting all this through, but thank you for bringing that up as one of the priorities. And again, I will try to do a more thorough job in my planning director reports, and maybe that's a good place to continually to bring this up with you in keeping you abreast of what we're working very hard on right now.
So one of the things that I'm hearing that I think is very important is this information will help us get kind of a mind around a calendar of what's coming up, and for us to be helpful in understanding, in order to get it done in a time frame that it needs to get done, might we need to add a meeting here and there to do that. And as the chair, I would be more than happy to sit down with you to help map that out and maybe go through all of these and whatever else, and maybe map out a calendar of this next year's meeting schedule, you know, prioritized by, you know, first housing, then zoning, then conservation, or whatever it looks like, so that we can get our work done in a timely way to help move things along, because I know you're in between us and the council, so I'll sit down with you and I'd be happy to do that.
Great, thank you. And also, just one thing to keep in your back pocket is also, we've had great success by creating ad hoc subcommittees as a way to operate into Slipstream, getting language created and then coming back and doing real-time edits. We would never have gotten to the finish line on the general plan if we hadn't implemented real-time edits. It's a really valuable tool. We may do it some night on ordinances here, draft ordinances.
And we also had really good success doing maybe not a whole super committee, but I think we've also had experience where it's been very helpful to somehow have a conversation with the town council prior to just chucking something over the transom to make sure that we're headed in the right direction before we do too much work. So we might also want to look at where those discussion opportunities should be inserted somehow along these lines. So, any other conversation on this? Okay, thank you. On to the last discussion item, which is discussion consideration of civic engagement through digital information tools. Do you want to do any staff report premise, or you just want me to say why?
I'm going to pass it to you, but just point out that this is our second night of televising the Planning Commission. It's a pilot operation, and I think you were going to actually invite the audience, televised audience, to communicate with us if they like this.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring this up because I've been feeling a bit like I would like to improve constructive and well-informed civic public engagement, and was thinking that one way of doing this was to look at introducing additional enhanced digital tools for us to engage the public, besides just expecting them to come here at, what time is it right now? 10:40 at night, and ways that the town, 9:40, and ways that the town might go about doing that. And I think the enhancement of video is a good example. And I know that, for example, tonight we're adding on top of that time stamping on our agenda, so that, and the minutes, actually time stamping of the minutes, so that in the future, people who maybe didn't get to see this live could go to the minutes, and it will have a timestamp on it, and then they could go to the video and they could scroll through the video to find the particular topic that they were interested in, so they don't have to watch the whole thing. And so by making it a timestamp, that enhances the public's ability to be informed on the issues that they're most interested in. And I was also really interested in this because I've become aware of things like the 2009 White House Open Government Directive. There's a lot of conversation, I believe, going on around local and national government and open government and transparency. And so I know in my experience, there's a lot of people who are interested in participating but can't show up in person, and that there's a lot of enhancement that could be made in terms of access to information. So another example might be the the noise ordinance that we're talking about tonight, if there was a way of having digital tools where someone who is interested in noise issues in Fairfax could search on a digital site for, please show me all of the instances in which noise was discussed by the town for the last 5 years, and it would pull up the video of tonight's conversation, and it would pull up the noise ordinance, and it would pull up the minutes from meetings. So,
Madam Chair,
yes.
are you moving away from the Planning Commission now into the town at large?
I'm just throwing out the
Yeah.
concept, and I'm also very aware that this is not instead of face-to-face, it's just wanting to get some feedback from commissioners about what they feel about this, and I'm very aware that I am not meaning that this is going to happen overnight, and I'm not expecting the staff to do anything different immediately. I meant to just bring this up as a discussion to hear what my other commissioners...
Focused on the Planning Commission as a body. And let me just reiterate it. This is a pilot test last month and this month, so please offline get back to me and tell me whether you think it's working, and you were going to suggest that the audience can actually contact us. They can always email us, and our emails are online and the town code's online. People are always at liberty to send emails, which many people do after these items are discussed. And I think the interaction just from walking around town after the town council started being televised, and actually since just the one televised planning commission a month ago with the Good Earth issue, there were people watching that got back with comments. So I think we've already succeeded to sort of move in your direction. And then there's some things we're doing thanks to you in the General Plan Implementation Committee about how to share comments on product without violating the Brown Act in between meetings by having that information go one way towards back to staff and then discussed at the next meeting, but without violating the Brown Act, getting our comments into one person that then combines the comments, all can see it, and then come ready at the next meeting. And it's not a violation of the Brown Act because it's not a serial meeting. It's one-way communication. So that's something, for example, in the future, we could fold into the planning committee with merging comments off of a document, and then we bring that back. And then you all get to see those merged comments prior to the meeting.
Those are the kinds of things that I think could really enhance the efficiency of our work so that we're not sitting here wordsmithing, that we send our wordsmiths in ahead of time, merge them together. So just trying to look for ways that we can enhance our efficiency and enhance the connection and feedback from. So for what I was thinking of tonight was if anybody is watching on, the other thing is it's really weird not knowing who's out there watching or what kind of feedback we're getting. So if people are on Twitter and would use hashtag #FairfaxPC and tweet while they were watching this, we would be able to search that and know how many people just listened to that and responded. It might be an interesting feedback loop. So if you're out there watching and on Twitter, send a tweet with a hashtag #FairfaxPC and we'll see what we get as a beta test. I don't know.
And the thought occurs to me, we might check with I don't want to interrupt Damien's recording exercise here, the Wizard of Oz behind the dais, but we can check with Community Media Center of Marin and find out what sort of data they can share with us. With hits on a web page, there might be some way to figure out hits on the video.
So I just was bringing it because I was wondering what the perspective was on the commission, if there was any other ideas. I've done some research on this in terms of what are the there's 3 general philosophies in general around open government and digital. It's around transparency, participation, and collaboration. Those are the 3 that came out of the White House Open Government Directive. So there's a lot of conversation and a lot of work around that to kind of tier off of in terms of, well, what does that mean? How do you prioritize what you do? Those kinds of things. But I just wanted to open it up and hear what other people had to say.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I know at this point, I'm involved in the Chamber of Commerce, and we're doing you might say, a digital facelift there, where we're getting our website together and it's more interactive. There's Hyperlocal, which is going to try to involve the members of the chamber that don't have brick and mortar stores. People are up in the, have home offices up in the woods, and just to get everybody connected and talking to each other. And it's I know it's important, just speaking as somebody who's over 60, that the whole digital thing is critical for the up and coming people in Fairfax to get engaged and to come down to the old-fashioned town meetings is quaint and all, but it's just not going to get it for these kids. So I think it's really important, and I think it's great that we do it.
Yeah, I think I would just chime in. I think the televised aspect is helpful and sort of a one-way communication tool for people that can't be physically present, but one, they need to know about it, they need to know about how to access it, so that may be something if we're going to do to put more prevalent on the website. But the second is, how can you make it a dynamic engagement? And so how, if there's somebody at home, how can they be in real time at the meeting and feedback questions and things if that's something of concern?
And it's a really, I mean, it's a brave, I don't want to use brave, it's a new medium that a lot of our legal structures aren't caught up. I mean, if you look at the Brown Act, it's all written for meetings, and the interpretation of meetings are face-to-face meetings. So there's a lot of gray area that needs to be very thoughtfully engaged with, because there's not a, our laws haven't quite caught up to the digital age.
The Brown Act is to make sure that the deliberation and discussion is done in a public manner and in a public forum. That's what the Brown Act is. That's why you can't have, 3 people get together and make a decision before there's a public meeting. So it's the sharing of information and the education and outreach. And I think there's value to that. I mean, I found myself watching, I think it was Mill Valley's Planning Commission. I was like, what am I doing? But it was intriguing and interesting. I don't know, but I think the bigger problem is that people don't know what's coming. They don't know about the issue up front. Right. I think it's great, and we can this provides a different avenue for people to get that information, and it shouldn't be only you live within 300 feet of a site that's going to have a hearing, or like the noise ordinance, it's not like a mailing goes out to everybody. So this is really, I see it as the way of trying to get the information out to more people, make it more accessible to folks. I would be concerned about trying to take comments from the public.
Twitter comments as
I think
open it up to.
You have to draw the line somewhere.
Exactly. No, I'm just saying that's.
But I think it, as an outgoing, this is what's happening, and somehow getting the agendas more, so people understand. It's more than just here's the agenda. It's like, and maybe it's when we have the noise ordinance or when the housing element comes forward, that there's a better way of doing more outreach. And it's not just, hard copy mailings. Right. And it's not just, we posted it at town hall, which is required, that maybe there are some things that could be done that way that really do get more people to see what's coming up, and so they can participate when it matters.
So, for example, I'm a member of a number of listservs for different organizations, and part of my opt-in was check the box of the topics that I'm interested in, and that auto-generated emails to me whenever those topics come up. And so I get special auto-generated notices whenever there's something new on the blog or the website or in an agenda, for say, if you categorized, and one of the tenets of participation and collaboration is this idea of making information searchable and indexed, is specifically called out in these philosophies, is information that's searchable and indexed. And once it's searchable and indexed, then people can choose to focus on those topics. And so, just as an idea, if things were searchable and indexed, then somebody could say, auto send me agendas when housing is coming up, or I want to make sure that I'm pinged when noise is coming up, or something like that. And that's, that's way down the line for us, but it's an idea.
But maybe it's in the short term, it's because this happened before, even when we were having a lot of these element discussions, and we would have meetings and there wouldn't be anybody, and suddenly it's a shock. So
Right.
I think it's worth not creating a new system, but what are the opportunities to, notify everybody in the town when we are going to discuss the housing element, which is different than a normal meeting where we just have, 3 housing applications, and, it's legitimate to say, okay, the people within 300 feet are affected, they need to know about it. But if we are discussing something that's town-wide, how do we advertise that? How do we get that out to the general public so that they know about it and they can come and actually make a comment? I think, Good Earth, the dispensaries, there are issues that bring people out. And I think, or I would hope that things like these ordinances would bring people out, because when they get to the town council, that's when everything, suddenly we got no comments, nobody said anything, and suddenly there's a response and a reaction. We want to have that here so we can work through some of those things before it gets to the town council. That's the purpose of the commission in the first place, is try to work those out. So.
And I agree. I think if there's a way that we can have, whether it's a listserv or just an email blast, there's a handful of people that are constantly looking at the website and know what's there and know the content or know where to post. I know many more people that have no idea that any of this even exists. And if there was an opt-in, that there's just a mail blast that goes out. We may want to entertain, there's different tools that we can use for that.
My only comeback on that is, boy, would I love staff and the time, because we are just overwhelmed with our work program and a limited staff. And so we have to triage our work all the time. So I have just as much enthusiasm.
Some of these things really come down to the council
allocating the funds to address the needs of program changes. I mean, we are challenged with our IT system. We have computers that don't talk to each other. We have shared drives that can't be accessed. We have printers that change font when you send a Word document between machines. So we have all these challenges with a small town and an increasingly complex, technologically oriented operation. I'm really thrilled that our new town manager authorized, along with the mayor, this pilot program to video and televise these planning commission meetings, because a lot of the public, I mean, you can understand, it's just so bureaucratic. They don't understand the difference between a planning commission, which is an appointed body, versus a town council, which are the electeds. And what you all do are make findings based on law that can be challenged and have to be supported by the town council if they're appealed. And it's a much different role you all play here with the town than the electeds play. So we're right now succeeding, at least with folks that are watching this that may not be aware of that. I found myself trying to sort of be instructive as we go along and informing people what's happening. So I'm going to try and get better and better at sort of explaining to our audience that's not in the room right now, that's watching, what we're doing and how we're doing it and what the steps are. And it's helping me to sort of be more deliberative in explaining things like that.
I just want to add a few things. It is possible to get on the email list. I get an email when the town council agenda is sent out. If there's town-wide issues on the planning commission, maybe the people who get email list, they could be added to that list. So that's one suggestion.
This is just, it's a touchy subject in my little tiny department, because I have staff that is constantly on the threshold of having more than they can deal with. So we typically, at this point, we don't have an email list for people that want to be sent out things. That doesn't mean we shouldn't. That doesn't mean we couldn't move in that direction. Right now, we're just, we fortunately have an intern, which is part of what I'll be sharing with you at the planning director's report in a moment. There are ways, I'm sorry, on and off the air here.
Just a little technical difficulty.
Yeah, sorry. This is part of the technological challenge we're all faced with. World, we would be able to do that. I just apologize in advance that our bandwidth right now, we're running ragged.
And one other suggestion that would be really helpful, even for myself, when we send out the staff reports, we get the written copy, that if we could request PDF copies of the drawings, and then those could be posted on the
Right.
website.
Right, and that's on my radar to try to amend the application process, but that would be something also that have to be approved by the council on what needs to be submitted. And so it's on my list. And I even dream about getting a full-size scanner so we could actually scan the documents ourselves, even though it's not an onerous requirement of most architects.
No, usually it's something that we do all the time already.
Right.
And then we could also display them on the screen,
Right,
such
right.
as you have behind you.
Right, and then we get little details like we want an actual scale, things like that, because you're changing the dimension of the drawing.
That was the old commission. Because as soon as those arrived, and everybody's up here with full sheets.
Right.
But yes.
Anyway, I'm with you. Again, I invite you all down on Packet Day to help fold envelopes and mail out to the 300 notice people so that Linda doesn't have to fold flyers and put stamps on. I think it'd be a really good thing. I'd like to throw one back at you. I think that all the town council and all the planning commissioners should come down and volunteer on town council Packet Day and planning commission Packet Day. It'd be a wonderful experience for you all. I'll buy you lunch if you do.
We'll buy you lunch. We'll bring pizza and bring pizza.
That's a deal. Anyway.
We don't have to continue on. I just wanted to throw this out, and if there are opportunities in the future when we have particular subjects to weave this in as we go without making it more work, I think it would be a good thing. So let's move on to the next one, which is the minutes from April 18th.
I have a couple corrections. So just, I believe on page 3, the first sentence says Commissioner Hall and Mr. Rich. That should be Mr. Rushton. And it's again on the 5th paragraph as well.
Thank you. Any other? This was actually a really good example. I also watched the Planning Commission meeting on the 17 Woodland Road, and it was incredibly helpful this evening because I didn't have to ask a bunch of questions that I might have asked if I hadn't watched it already. So it was very effective in that means. If you're going to be absent from a meeting to especially if there's a topic of an interest that you know is going to be continued, it was very helpful. Any other changes or amendments?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I have to abstain because I wasn't there. Okay, let's go on to Planning Director's report.
Well, I'll be really brief. I mentioned that we're working furiously to get narrative amendments to the housing element, which is not going to change our substantive approach to meeting the quota, our regional housing needs allocation. And we're also working on updating the areas of the zoning ordinance that need to, by law, be put in compliance with the general plan. But I'm not going to go into that much more than that. I just wanted to share with you a little good news. We have an intern who has fallen from the heavens. He came over to work about 3 weeks ago on a school project, and he's a graduate student at UC Berkeley in the Department of City and Regional Planning, which I happen to be an alumni of. And he came over at the suggestion of one of the professors I used to be a TA with, or perhaps it was a student actually. But anyway, he was working on that paper and came to the GPIC meeting, and and dinner and beforehand, and I threw out the idea of an internship, and he said, wow, and they stop so early nowadays, they're already done. So lo and behold, he took us up on it. He applied for a fellowship. He was granted a fellowship to compensate him for the 2 months he will be with us. He started on Monday, and he will go through July 12th. His name is Arijit Sen. He is an architect in his home country of India. He is actually from Mumbai. He is a charming individual, and it's true, Arijit, you are a great person. He's watching tonight, so welcome to our town. And I invite you all to come by and say hello to him. He's working at the new workstation in our central conference area in Town Hall, and when he gets bumped out of there, he'll be doubling up in my room. But he's a wonderful addition, and he's already getting a taste of our fast pace and all that we're asking of him. The town manager has asked him to fill out a grant for getting money for making this a module dais and a module backdrop so that the stage can start to be used for other performances. I've got him helping me on some research for best practices in hybrid commercial zones with a little bit of a form-based twist to it. Linda's going to be giving him some very simple applications to process, and he's also hearing some of the amazing experiences at the front counter with people that can't quite believe that they can't do something, or somebody that just can't believe that they can't have their own private parking space in front of their house on the public road. And then our building official took him on what he humorously termed today the planner's nightmare tour to all the extremely problem properties up in the hinterland. So Arijit Sen is becoming well-versed in the nightmares of being a planning director in a small town. But he's really welcome, and we need about 12 more of him to be able to do the email list you were talking about and the other things. So anyway, that's all I have to report tonight. Thank you.
Any questions or commissioner comments and requests related to that or anything else? No? Well, the next thing on the list here is adjournment. Anyone like to?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting this evening.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Thank you very much for tonight's meeting.
Good job.
Thank you.